going to make sure that sound is okay, and if everyone else can pop themselves on mute. It might be you, Fiona, I can hear getting feedback. Yes, thank you. This public hearing of the Standing Committee on Communications, the Arts and Sport for the inquiry into arts and cultural philanthropy. I acknowledge that we're joining from places that have been the meeting place of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples for thousands of years. I acknowledge the cultures of any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander peoples with us today. A program for today's public hearing is available on the committee's website, and it is due to conclude early afternoon around 2 o'clock Canberra time. For our first roundtable, I now call the representatives of Bus Stop Films, Tarrawarra Museum of Arts, Live Performance Australia and Western Sydney Arts Alliance. Now, for the Hansard record, I'm going to ask each of our witnesses to state your full names and the capacity in which you appear before the committee. And I'll go in the order that I just listed everyone. So I'll start with Bus Stop Films.
Good morning. My name is Tracy Corbin-Matchett and I'm the Chief Executive Officer of Bus Stop Films.
Thank you very much. Tarrawarra Museum of Arts. You're still on mute.
Sorry, I can't see everybody, so I'm not sure if Victoria is here, but I am Fiona Menzies. I'm the Deputy Chair of Tarrawarra Museum of Art, and I'm joined by our Director, Victoria Lynn.
And I'm sure I saw her earlier, but maybe I was mistaken.
Ms. Templeman, you're on mute.
Whoops. Live Performance Australia.
My name is Kim Tran. I'm the Director of Policy and Governance at Live Performance Australia.
Thank you, Ms. Tran. And Western Sydney Arts Alliance.
Thank you, Chair. I'm Jordan Valla-Giorgio and I am the Deputy Chairperson of the Western Sydney Arts Alliance.
And I think we have Ms. Lynn.
Yes, I'm back. Sorry, I got thrown off. I'm Victoria Lynn. I'm the Director of Tarrawarra Museum of Art, and I'm joined by Fiona Menzies, who's Deputy Chair of our board.
Fantastic. I knew I'd seen you there at some point in the preparation. Thank you all for being with us. As these proceedings are public, they're being broadcast and recorded by Hansard. If you wish to have evidence heard in private, please let the committee know and we'll consider your request. Although the committee does not require you to give evidence under oath, I wish to advise you that this hearing is a formal proceeding of the Parliament. Giving false or misleading evidence is a serious matter and may be regarded as contempt of Parliament. If you object to answering a question, please state the reasons for your objection and the committee will consider the matter. We have copies of your submissions, thank you. And now I'll just introduce the members of the committee who are joining us. I'm Susan Templeman, Chair of the committee, and I'd ask my fellow committee members to introduce themselves, starting with the Deputy Chair.
Hello, I'm Mary Aldred. I'm the member for Monash in southeast Victoria, part of the Gippsland region.
Thank you, Deputy Chair. And Ms Stegel.
Everyone, thank you. Zali Stegel, the Federal Member for Warringah in Sydney, Lower North Shore and Northern Beaches.
Thank you. Now, I know we may be joined by other committee members throughout the hearing, and as they arrive, I'll introduce them. But now I'd like to invite our witnesses to make an opening statement. I'll ask you to do them just in that same order I had. And if you when we move beyond that, I'll also, because we've got quite a few different voices, as you respond to questions a bit later on, it'd be great if you could just say your name at the start, just so everybody makes sure they know that we're matching the answers to the right person. But initially, if we can start with opening statements, and I'll start with Bus Stop Films, please, if you'd like to make an opening statement.
Thank you, Susan. So I speak today as CEO of Bus Stop Films. We are a non-profit social enterprise that exists to use film and filmmaking to unlock human rights outcomes for people with disability. We have a national footprint, and we're really passionate about opening up the arts, particularly the screen industry, to people with disability on both sides of the camera, and using storytelling to unlock creativity, social connection, and employment. As CEO, my role can take me from running a Bunnings barbecue to writing funding submissions, to being here today to plead our case and have our sector and our community considered in this. The arts is so important, and philanthropy is so important to us and our sustainability. And community-based grassroots arts organisations are important and worthy, and we're a critical part of the landscape, both as an employer of arts workers, but also about sharing the beautiful creativity of people with disability to audiences. And philanthropy and the support of both the government and private investment and the community that wants to give is really vital to our sustainability. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And we will come to questions a little bit later, Ms. Corbin-Matchett. So now I'll ask Tallawarra Museum of Art if you'd like to make one of you or both of you would like to make an opening statement.
My name is Victoria Lynn. I'm the Director of Tarawara Museum of Art, and I'm speaking on behalf of myself and Fiona Menzies. We're an independent, not-for-profit art museum in the Yarra Valley in Victoria. We were established in 2003, and we're actually the product of two incredible philanthropists, Eva and Mark Beeson, who were passionate collectors, and they donated the building that houses our museum and also a collection of modern and contemporary Australian art. And we generate a suite of exhibitions and experiences throughout the year in a breathtaking location on Wurundjeri country. So the board of directors includes experienced directors in the arts and cultural sector, as well as other not-for-profit sectors, and many of our donors are also, many of our board members are also donors, and they've been arts administrators. And so we have a deep understanding of the situation for raising funds in the arts. Approximately 70% of the museum's turnover is supported by our foundation, the Tarawara Museum of Art Foundation, a fund that was established by the late Eva and Mark Beeson. And the remaining costs are raised through ticket sales, sponsorship, philanthropic trusts and foundations, government grants, in-kind support, fundraising activities, and so on. So we just feel that it's very important to understand that the reason why donors give to an organisation like ours is not just because they want a tax deduction. Donors also give because they want to be part of a community of gifting. They're very passionate about the arts, and they value the arts in society. And I think it's important to understand that the situation with raising funds now in the arts is both cultural and structural. There's a lack of staff to be able to raise funds. We have one part-time staff member who does applications, acquittals, works in philanthropy, donors, government grants, etc. But it's also cultural, that it's very important that we raise the profile and importance of the arts in the wider society, and that we understand that arts and culture are central to both economic development and to creating inclusive and tolerant communities. And so those are some of the main statements I want to make. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'll now ask Western, actually, if I said I'm doing it in the same order, I think it's Live Performance Australia, who I'll ask to go next.
Thank you, Chair. I'm Kim Tran, representing Live Performance Australia. which is the national peak body for the live arts and entertainment industry. Our membership covers all performing art forms, companies of all sizes, as well as not-for-profit and commercial entities. Many of Live Performance Australia's members have made individual submissions to this inquiry, including the Australian Ballet, Australian Brandenburg Orchestra, Australian Chamber Orchestra, Bell Shakespeare, Belvoir, AST, which is a consortium of non-profit theatre companies, La Mama, Melbourne Recital Centre, Melbourne Theatre Company, the National Performing Arts Partnership Framework Organisations, the National Institute of Dramatic Art, Opera Australia, Queensland Music Festival, Queensland Performing Arts Centre, Regional Arts Victoria and Sydney Theatre Company. These organisations have lots of experience in fundraising and philanthropy to help inform the committee of this inquiry. They also make significant contributions to our cultural life and social well-being. Philanthropy plays an essential role in supporting the goals of performing arts organisations. In recent years, it has never been more important due to rising production, touring and operational costs, cost of living pressures for audiences, as well as reduced government funding in arts and culture in real terms. Increasingly, performing arts companies are expected to do more with less. Philanthropy and fundraising are not just nice-to-haves. They are essential to the financial viability and sustainability of our performing arts organisations to deliver on their purpose. Their purpose also includes activities that occur off-stage, such as education and community engagement programs and programs to develop the next generation of artists and creatives. This inquiry comes at a crucial time, not only to help address the realities facing performing arts organisations, but also because government is currently developing its national cultural policy. This inquiry provides a valuable opportunity to help shape longer-term outcomes for arts and cultural organisations through policy recommendations to government. Live Performance Australia welcomes support that encourages philanthropic giving to arts and culture. However, philanthropy is not a substitute for existing or future government investment, and it should not be seen as the source for filling the gap to fund creative projects or organisations because government cannot. When the philanthropic and arts and cultural sectors connect on shared goals, ambitions and visions, that's when the true magic happens, bringing about meaningful impact for the intended beneficiaries. However, it is highly competitive for donor support alongside other sectors, and there are a few challenges to overcome. Firstly, there is a need to build greater awareness among prospective donors that arts and culture are worthy causes. Secondly, there is the need to strengthen capability and capacity for arts and cultural organisations to attain and to attract and retain donors. Thirdly, the right settings need to be in place to encourage philanthropic giving, such as tax settings. And finally, there needs to be a holistic view of the mechanisms for both not-for-profit and commercial organisations, including proposals such as a live performance production incentive, in addition to targeted measures for not-for-profits and charities. I thank the committee for inviting me to appear at this inquiry and for the opportunity to make this opening statement.
Thank you, Ms Tran. And Mr Valagiorgio, if you'd like to make an opening statement for Western Sydney Arts Alliance, please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. I'd first like to acknowledge that I'm an autistic artist and a disabled advocate, so apologies in advance if anyone has any communication challenges with me. I'm here as the Deputy Chairperson of the Western Sydney Arts Alliance, which represents arts and cultural organisations across Western Sydney, particularly the small and medium sector. Western Sydney is home to more than 10% of Australia's population. It is one of the country's fastest growing regions with significant urban, First Nations, culturally diverse and deaf and disabled communities. Historic underinvestment and government cultural policies that overlook Western Sydney's social, cultural and economic differences from Eastern Sydney have entrenched inequalities in funding, philanthropic access and organisational capacity. Our organisations are drawn from and work with communities that face intersecting forms of disadvantage and identity without funding that actually reflects the demands of that work. We have to work harder and do more with less, as do many arts organisations across Australia. Without a distinct geographic focus that addresses local barriers, efforts to actually grow philanthropy risk reinforcing those existing inequalities rather than reducing them. Thank you.
Thank you. And listening to all your opening statements, I can't help but reflect on what a diverse group of people we have, whether it's the size of your organisations or the people that you're representing, whether it's the geography, the art forms. So thank you for coming together, because we're really interested in hearing that real diversity of views. I want to also acknowledge the huge amount of expertise and experience that this particular group is bringing to our discussion. And we're quite some way into our hearings, and it's very evident to me that you guys, we looked at the things you'd said and we know you have a lot to offer. So thank you for kicking that off. I also want to acknowledge that we have obviously, the current government's focused a lot on arts funding, but what this inquiry is about is in no way about replacing any continuing increases in government funding that I will certainly be advocating for as Special Envoy for the Arts, but looking at how we use other levers to boost what is already a key part of arts funding through philanthropy for the sector. So that's what the focus of our questioning will be around, and we look forward to your thinking on it. I have noted that we've also been joined by another one of our colleagues, Ms. Price. Ms. Price, would you like to just introduce yourself? And thanks for jumping on.
Thanks, Chair. I hope you can hear me. I'm sorry I was delayed. I had problems with technology, but anyway, that's no excuse. So Melissa Price, Federal Member for Durack, which is the largest electorate in Australia, represents 50% of Western Australia. And I'm sorry I missed some of the opening statements, but I'm sure I'll catch up quickly. So thanks to everyone for being available this morning. Much appreciated.
Indeed, and thank you. Yeah, thank you to my committee members on being able to take part. So in terms of questioning, I'm just going to kick off with a couple of questions, and then I'm going to throw to the Deputy Chair, and then our other colleagues will follow. I'm sure we've got far too much to ask you in the time we have available, so I will try and be succinct. I think given where we are in the inquiry, we're probably, some of my questions are drilling down into quite specific things. So if there are things that you need to add that are important that we're not specifically asking, feel free to add that and provide context. And if you'd like to add something to a question that someone else has been asked, please feel free to jump in and add that rather than waiting for a specific question to come your way. That's what in this roundtable, this virtual roundtable, I'm hoping that the ideas, will sort of move between various witnesses. So each of your submissions provides some really tangible experiences and recommendations. I might start with just the broader one, so we can make sure that we have covered the top line things about the 2 or 3 key things that you think would really make a difference, and it's been touched on in some of the opening statements. And perhaps, Ms. Tran, you just happen to be the person who's on the big screen in my virtual inquiry world. I'm just wondering if you can articulate why the key things you've recommended, why and how they would make a difference.
One of the pieces of feedback that our members told us was how the impact of leveraged or matched funding at, when they do their own campaigns, if a small donor, for example, knows that, my small contribution is going to be matched by somebody else's, that's really impactful. And hence, that is one of the reasons why we've recommended that a match funding sort of type of scheme in our submission. And there are many different models, and I know reading some of the other submissions, there are different types of models that could be implemented. But as a broad concept, I think that's really worthy of consideration. We've, in similarly to that type of theme, having increased tax deductibility. So rather than the one-for-one, currently that individual taxpayers can make when they do a tax deductible donation, if that level of tax deductibility could be increased, I think would be also very impactful. I touched on the point, and I think some other people have touched on the point in their opening submissions about capability and capacity within the sector to leverage philanthropic opportunities. We think that's also an opportunity that could be addressed, whether that be through extending the PBI status for organisations that they can attract and retain staff who hopefully have either these types of skills, because it's such a competitive environment for being able to retain skills, and it is a specialised skill set, especially when it comes to philanthropy. So any incentives or levers that employers or charities can have would be helpful, in addition to other, sector development type of initiatives to increase those capabilities. So whether it's extending the programs that Creative Australia or the previous creative partnerships Australia used to do or have done, that's about building those skills level, and whether it be board training or resources and templates and workshops and those sorts of things, our members thought were also really, really valuable. And then in the last point of just the whole landscape for, I talked about how it's really competitive for attracting donors, and that there are so many charities, and the stats say that the donors who give to arts and culture is actually a very, very small proportion relative to the other charities that exist. And hence I think how we can look at raising the profile of arts and culture as being a really worthy cause would be another worthy area for support. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Thanks for kicking that off. Now, would someone else like to either touch on those, because there's some overlap in the priorities that I've read in your submissions, but flesh out those ideas? Maybe, yes, I can see Ms. Corbin Matchett.
Thank you, and thank you, Kim, for that. Just building on that, it is hard to, we're not curing cancer. We are not, science-based, but we are worthy, and the arts is so important and critical. And for us to be able to demonstrate that to philanthropists, that it's not also about giving to the highbrow. The opera and the opera house, there is this grassroots, the giving day, and it's coming up again, and we had a conversation in the team, do we participate? Last year it was such a lot of work for such a little return, and we, it kind of does pit us all against each other, but if you're not in it, then you're not visible. Is there another way to we see it in the screen industry where we have these workshops or these opportunities where you can round table and pitch your project to producers or production companies or studios that are looking for new projects. Is there a way to bring the philanthropists and those with the desire to give and the organisations needing the support together in other mechanisms, rather than just this one day a year where we're all got one initiative a year where we are competing with each other, and it is a flooded landscape. I feel like I'm constantly asking for favours or pitching, and each of us comes to this. There's so many amazing worthy organisations just across this screen and across Australia, supporting our communities and our patch. We support the disability community. It's 20% of Australia's population. It's a big and bold joy, but equally burden to carry, and just how we measure the effectiveness of the giving days, and match funding is vital. It helps us. A lot of, I find as well, the philanthropists, it's very hidden. There are hidden trusts, and it's, you can't get across. I got an email, thank you very much, from a philanthropy in Western Australia last night, and you've got to have, does anyone on your board have a connection? It's really as sort of smoke and mirrors? Do you have the magic password to get past the expression of interest point, to get in front of that board for them to see the worthiness? So it's a very unclear pathway often to connect your organisation to philanthropists and that want to build that relationship with you and give to you continuously. So I don't know if it unlocks some training, building some capacity in our sectors or some other events or initiatives where philanthropists and the arts can be brought together.
Mm. Can I ask you, the first Ausgiving Day, you mentioned that it took a lot of effort to get all the systems in place and do it. Will it be easier if you participate second time round?
I think we'll know the we created a video, we had a dance, maybe we overcooked it. We're a screen org, and we felt like also too how we deliver and how we create messaging was on display, rather than just straight up participating. So I think we have a greater understanding of how we might be able to change our messaging, make it more succinct, and we will participate, because if you don't, then you're not visible. But I think we had grandiose ideals that, oh wow, this is going to be amazing, and we're going to get out there and we're going to raise quite a lot of money, and but it's still it's about raising your profile and not putting all your eggs in one basket, so to speak. But obviously, if you're not in it, then you can't get an outcome. Maybe we overcooked it. We're screen makers. We may have come up with too much of a grandiose idea.
I'm going to refrain from making any comment about how any sector of the arts might overcook things. And who would like to offer their sort of key things next? And if you want to pick up on the ones that have been raised, you're also welcome to do that. Mr. Valagiorgio, or Ms. McKenzie, the way this screen works, I can't always see everyone at the same time. I'm sorry.
Perhaps I'll go.
And then I'll come to Mr. Valagiorgio after you.
Thank you, Chair. Look, at the risk of attracting the ire of some of my colleagues in the arts sector, I think in this whole discussion, particularly among arts organisations, there's a really critical thing that's missing, and that is, what do donors think and what do donors want? I mean, I read a lot of the submissions and almost none of them talked about donors. And I can tell you, in my 30 plus years of working in philanthropy and fundraising in the arts sector, never once has a donor said to me, if only the tax deduction was more. It doesn't come up because it's not an issue. And I think the whole sector's jumped on this idea of having increasing the tax deduction from 100% to 150%. I can tell you, not only do I think it won't make a difference, I actually think it could be detrimental. I mean, I think most donors give because they give to what they care about. But if I was a donor who was looking at my end of financial year tax and my tax accountant said to me, you need to give away $15,000, if there was an opportunity for 150% tax deduction, I would probably give less, not more. I think it could actually be quite detrimental, and I think we need to be careful what we're wishing for. It's not what motivates donors. They expect the tax deduction because it's there, but it's not what motivates them. People give to things they care about, and so the challenge for the arts sector is to make people care.
And can I ask you, what have you seen is effective in making people care about the arts?
I think people are attracted to success and to big visions. And I think the other mistake that often organisations make is, I think, it's going to be so hard to get money, so we'll just ask for this much. Donors really, especially if you consider donors are usually people who've made money themselves. So in order to have made money, they've been entrepreneurial and they've had a vision, a big vision. So when we go sort of cap in hand and apologetic and say, oh, we only just need this much, they kind of look at you and think, I'm not sure if that's going to be any good. They respond to a big vision and a big ask because they want to be part of that success. And they see it very much, donors see it as a partnership, not a transaction. It's a partnership. And so they want to have that discussion with you. And having been a fundraiser, one of the things I've often done is said to my colleagues in my arts organisation, I need you, maybe the artistic director or someone from the creative side, in our case at Tarawara, Victoria, they want to talk to you. They don't want to talk to the fundraiser. They want to talk to the people making the magic. And because that's why they're there, because they love what you do. So they want to have those conversations with the creative people. I don't know if that's making sense, but
thank you.
I really think that the committee needs to consider the motivations of donors.
I know, I really appreciate your insights there. Mr. Valagiorgio, can we ask you for the Western Sydney Arts Alliance, either your top three or if you want to comment on any of the input that's been made by others?
Thank you, Chair. I think that the PBI exemption or reclassifying is one that would actually recognise the role that a lot of grassroots, smaller to medium arts organisations play in Australia in terms of social wellbeing, health, arts outcomes, cultural practice. That would make things more sustainable as a start. And I believe when it comes to philanthropy, one of the disconnects at the moment between some wonderful work that Creative Australia and others are doing is recognising the reality of where small to medium organisations are at in terms of, in order to participate, say, in a match funding program, you have to have a set of skills, capacity, even the financial investment. And for a lot of our members, not all, I can't speak for everyone, but there is an experience where you're choosing between that and doing the work that you need to with communities that you're working with and representing that might have access barriers or additional complex needs in order to deliver really high quality work. So I actually think that one thing that hasn't been quite discussed very much, but has by some in previous sessions, has been the idea of actually paying people who are part of these programs. So not just offering the match funding, but actually paying for the staff time or capacity to actually reflect the fact that other work needs to occur at the same time. And it is, in a sense, that it is a privilege to be able to fundraise and to be able to have the access to connections and the ability to invest in philanthropic resources, including staffing. I also think there needs to be some work around building donor bases in certain geographic parts of Australia, Western Sydney being one of them as well, because, you know, with respect, you can have the best campaign in the world, and if there's no one on the other end to donate, or you simply aren't connected to the existing resources, it can be really complex to get a great outcome. And that's also led to, I guess, some philanthropic fatigue in our experience and certain other small to medium orgs. It makes it more complex to actually choose to put your time and effort into philanthropy, thinking I might not actually even get back what I've put in, let alone how am I going to be successful. And around that, of course, the capability building and capacity to be able to deliver a vision that, donors do understand is very, very important. And I think also we simply don't have data that disaggregates. For example, in Western Sydney, we kind of don't know how to do what the donor base is, who's donating, why, what organisations are successful and why across what art forms. And data poverty leads to an inability to get effective targeted measures or outcomes or address a situation. So I believe that we're there. I can't speak to the international experience from direct knowledge, but from my understanding, I think the Singapore model has delivered great returns where there are higher returns on investment for a donation for an individual. But that's something, for more experts to comment on.
Thank you. Can I ask you, your submission discusses regional philanthropic hubs. What would you see those hubs sort of offering on a day-to-day basis, and what kind of support would it be for those orgs? I'm assuming around capacity and capability, but can you flesh out that idea for us, please?
Absolutely. So I think it is capability and capacity, having a resource that you can connect to that can help, in a sense, have a knowledge of an area and the way they work, and help them translate their messages for that donor audience and for philanthropy. Because I think that, in my experience, there's a lot of wonderful organizations who aren't able to fully capture and communicate how wonderful their work is and how high quality it is, and that would be the support. I also think there's room for things like pitch nights and these kind of, speed dating, these connections to philanthropists, because fundamentally, I think that there are donors that are interested, and there are organizations that are able to and should be being able to get support, and they're disconnected. So any kind of targeted measures that support that happening, I think, would be of great benefit to all parties.
Thank you. And as someone whose electorate sits on that, western edge of Greater Western Sydney, I've certainly thought about these issues from a local perspective. I'm going to hand over to my Deputy Chair, Ms. Aldred. I can't see her, but I'm pretty sure she's off mute. There we go. Yeah, over to you, Ms. Aldred.
Thank you, Chair. Two questions, if I may, through you. The first is to Ms. Tran. I was impressed with your opening statement on a number of points, and one of them was in relation to the importance of a national cultural strategy. Do you think it's important to reflect philanthropy in that strategy? And if you do, how might it be better reflected and enlivened?
Well, that's a good question. Obviously, with the government's consideration of the next cultural policy, there'll be many considerations through that. I'm aware that there is obviously already a government target to improve donations to, I think, 30%, and that may, government may look at that as part of the next cultural policy of how they can really achieve that goal. I guess this is where, if government were to recommend something about philanthropy in the next cultural policy, I guess this is part of the role of this inquiry, to sift through some of the amazing ideas that have been put forward of what would be the most impactful. From LPA's perspective, the three key areas that we think will be impactful is around, lifting the profile of that, giving to arts and culture is a worthy cause, to build awareness to, as I said, donors, strengthen the capacity and capability within arts organisations to access and leverage those opportunities, and seeing about looking at some of the other settings, whether it be through tax or some other mechanism. So they're sort of the broad areas that I think would be impactful and potentially may be reflected through the next national cultural policy.
Thank you. Chair, I've got two more questions, actually, if that's okay. My next question is to any member of the panel that may wish to respond. In the current economic climate, where cost of living, is a key priority for households and businesses and corporations, are any of you seeing those cost of living pressures reflected in your ability to attract philanthropy contributions?
It's Fiona Menzies speaking. Data is hard to get, and I don't know for sure, but I think the general data that's coming out of the philanthropic sector is that fewer people are giving, but those who are giving more. And,
yes.
I think different sectors where they get their money from is important. And obviously there's what in the philanthropic sector they call mass market giving, which is your everyday mums and dads, as they would say, who are giving to a range of charities. It might be Surf Lifesaving or the Cancer Council or whatever. The vast majority of support for the arts is actually coming from not from those people. So the cost of living, I don't think, affects them as much. We don't have the data, but I don't see any great evidence of there being huge declines in giving to the arts.
Thank you, Ms. Menzies.
Can I?
And I think Ms. Corbett-Machen wanted to comment on that one as well, and then there might be others.
Thank you. We have seen shrinkage in mum and dad business philanthropy, where small businesses donate to us or through a sponsorship, because they are in somewhat pulling back, and that because we work on a lot in regional areas, and so there's mum and dad business philanthropy donations have shrunk. Where we have had consistent giving, it is from our more affluent donors or donors at a higher level, and they see their donation to us in particular. It's more about supporting the disabled community than the arts exclusively. It is with us, it is a double-edged sword. They are supporting the arts and they are supporting people with disability, and it comes through their want and desire to unlock employment outcomes or a social connection for a person with disability, rather than straight up saying, I'd love to see you get your film made. That philanthropy for that production and artistic endeavours, I think, is it's a harder push up the hill for us. So that shrinkage has really come for us from those smaller donors, from the small businesses that are traditionally donated to us in our regional areas have said, we can't afford to do that this year. But that's just been our experience.
Thank you.
And I'll just double check. Did anyone else want to add to that?
Yes, Madam Chair, I'd like to add. It's Victoria Lynn from Tarawara. What we've noticed is that some of the philanthropic trusts and foundations who used to give generously to the arts have decided to shift their focus to welfare causes. So as cost of living and as other kind of welfare issues become higher on the agenda in society, those trusts and foundations are tending now to put their money towards welfare, social cohesion, education, and the environment has been a very big area and shift for some of those trusts and foundations.
Thank you. And if there are no other contributions to that question, through you, Chair, if I could just ask one final question.
Of course.
Thank you. And this is directed to any member of the panel that wishes to respond. In the charity sector, third-party businesses who charge a fee or a commission for donations are pretty common practice. Is that something that is discouraged or seen as problematic in the arts sector? And a supplementary question to that is, where you may be competing against other sectors for donations, is that a barrier or an additional hurdle to have to compete with, because often those third-party businesses are quite competitive in the way they go about those practices?
Thanks, Ms. Chair.
Transform Performance Australia. I'm not aware amongst LPA's membership of any of our members using those third-party providers, so it's very hard to comment. But I would say that some of them have talked about the difficulties in trying to attract and retain some donors because of sort of those shifts in focus. So one of the other witnesses talked about the shift from arts to, say, welfare-based charities or environment charities. That, I think that's definitely true in the sense that they're finding it hard to compete against these other causes. and particularly in the context of the intergenerational wealth transfer, where some of these bigger trusts and foundations, the priorities for the next generation is different to the priorities that their parents or grandparents may have had.
Thank you.
If nobody else would like to add to that, I'm going to ask Ms. Stegel to take over for her questions.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. I guess I wanted to sort of differentiate around the two kind of groups. We've got the small to medium organisations that have, I think, very different challenges to the larger ones. And what I'm really gathering from the evidence you're giving is for a small to medium, accessing that philanthropic funding is incredibly difficult because of contacts, opportunity and all of that. So I guess for that scale of art, I think is where the government needs to play a greater role of community support in the same way as it does maybe with sport. And so I guess my question would be, how accessible are you for the small to medium organisations at accessing grants programs, for example, because of, so, Chair, we have a lot of grants programs that come through on an electorate base that are sometimes geared towards volunteers, and then arts can come into that. But there are other grants programs that are more specific to other activities. So I was keen to understand, how successful have small organisations been in getting any kind of grants from federal government that support your organisations?
It's Kim Tran from Live Performance Australia. I think as a general comment, the demand for grants funding just outstrips what's available, regardless of what the grant funding program is. And so it's just hard for any organisation to get the money. But I think one of the key barriers to that, besides the actual amount of the funding pool, is the capability and capacity for organisations to do that. So, you'll have some organisations that have someone whose role is to do fundraising, and then you'll have other organisations where it's the Jill of all trades who has to do all of that, who is, both the head of the organisation plus the HR department plus the philanthropy team and the like. And so it really, really varies depending on the organisation, and hence what LPA has been saying around, how can we look at what are the things that we can do to help improve the capacity and capability within these organisations to be able to access those funds and grant programs.
But are you finding there are enough? Like, obviously the demand outsources availability, but do you feel, I'm curious to hear from some maybe the smaller, more localised organisations, where do you feel there is even access to grants programs to meet some of your needs?
It's Tracy speaking here from Bus Stop Films. We're small but mighty because we have a national footprint. I think one of the challenges that we face is a lot of the grants are set up for new initiatives rather than funding to keep the lights on. And that is one of the critical issues that a not-for-profit faces with sustainability. And to your point, and in full transparency, my other hat, I am on the board of Disability Sports Australia, so I'm very active in that space. A lot of them are volunteering grants, and there's local grants within electorates are very tiered towards sports and sports participation. Often arts doesn't even factor in. And I often say, if we funded the arts in the same way that we funded sports, wouldn't it be an amazing thing? And I wear two hats, and I love that space. But it is often, you've got a piece of work sitting on the shelf and you're trying to find a grant to match it, or you see a grant and you go, oh, that's a really great grant. What could we do with that? So you're trying to shoehorn an activity into this grant criteria, and applying for grants at all levels. Sometimes the process to get the smaller grants at a local granular level is equally as onerous as input and work to get a grant at a higher level that covers a bigger bucket of funds or a bigger geographic space, and you have to know which lever to pull and where you're going to get the most bang for the buck. And for us, for that sustainability, that ongoing capacity and to keep going, it is funding and resourcing to keep the lights on is often the more vital and necessary support that we need than always feeling like you have to come up with a new idea or new initiative to create. I mean, our pieces of work that we create are always going to be new and dynamic and wonderful, but our premise as an organisation in the arts that serves a vulnerable community is about keeping the lights on, keeping our staff paid, and being able to continue to do what we do. So that's where there's somewhat of a disconnect between that local funding. It is really often tied to those volunteering or infrastructure, new change rooms, pieces, things that rather than how can we support you just to keep going doing the wonderful work that you're doing.
And I was keen to hear, like Jordan, I think, around Western Sydney Arts Alliance. Is Jordan still?
Absolutely. Thank you very much. So I'll just outline, some of the research. There is a public funding crisis in Western Sydney in terms of research between 2015 and 2023 shows we're 10% of Australia's population, but the region actually received only 3.4% of federal arts funding compared to 23.5% that went to Eastern Sydney. Obviously, that's a large discrepancy. And the flow-on effects of that are that we have weakening of organisational capacity, workforce development is weakened, constrained long-term sustainability. So that does mean you rely more on project funding. And often organisations are going to be stuck between professional arts and social and community grants. And, I, in my personal capacity, which I'm not here as, I run a disability arts organisation, you find yourself ineligible for both in some instances when you're looking at things because you don't fit evenly between them. But overall, I guess that public investment gap, and the fact is that the federal government and the cultural policy doesn't at the moment recognise Western Sydney even as a separate geographic area to consider for funding and inequities, constrains the ability to be in a position, as others have said, to turn the lights on, to be able to go for that other grant, to be able to direct things when, a lot of people are just in crisis. And so only new initiatives or new and interesting things get funded. And that continues a cycle of underinvestment in core capacity and capabilities, which actually also constrains the ability to generate economic growth for artists, for arts workers, for creatives. So that would be my starting position, if that answers your question.
Did anyone else want to add?
I hope I'm not speaking out of turn here. It's Tracy again. In my being part of the Arts and Cultural Policy Review, I can say that a lot of what Jordan has just spoken to and Western Sydney and other regional or, outer metropolitan areas has come up consistently in some of the submissions. And so we're cognizant of that in the panel that I'm on, A Place for Every Story, as an issue that needs to be reflected and recognised as part of the Revive Arts and Cultural Policy Review, and how do we fund and elevate those communities in Western Sydney, and equivalent Western Sydney areas in outer metropolitan areas has come up. Conversely, the regions and how we support the arts communities in those spaces, both in infrastructure and story development, and access to the arts as practitioners and creatives, as well as audience members, and enjoying that. So that process is still ongoing. I actually have a meeting with the Minister this afternoon, but I appreciate it within this environment. This is, has come up, and we have noticed it in the submissions as well.
Yeah, so maybe share something we could consider around the National Cultural Policy research. But I had one other little quick question. I'm sorry. From, I think it was Fiona, you were talking about that in terms of philanthropic donations, it's generally not because of the tax deduction is expected, as you said, but it's not the driver or motivator. It's ultimately that it's either a personal association with that art form, organisation, or that desire to increase its visibility and social good. I guess my question was, you were saying you said they give because they care, and that's a key part of the motivations. Do you think the visibility of the arts is an important part around that motivation for giving at philanthropic level? So again, there are discrepancies in visibility. Large arts outcomes programs, right, gain a lot more visibility than others. And I don't know that we have a cohesive visibility plan at any level of government, really, for the arts. It falls on each organisation to generate it. I mean, I'm thinking, tourism, we have ads, we have campaigns, national campaigns, government funded around a lot of things, not when it comes to really arts and culture and what is gained socially from it. Do you think visibility would drive philanthropic donation?
I do. I think there's a real case to do a campaign for why the arts matter and what the impact is. I mean, it's not about we put on this many shows. It's about what happened as a result of we put on this many shows. People came together, it sparked conversations between people. I think, it's slightly ironic that the arts sector, which is largely about telling stories, is very bad at telling its own story about its own impact. So I do think that a campaign that would highlight why the arts are important and the impact that they have on our community would be very effective. I think there are, as Victoria sort of said earlier, there are a lot of people who will give to an art form because they love that art form. But I think also a lot of donors to the arts are giving to the ancillary activities around the arts. So, in fact, one of the frustrations of arts companies is they get more donations for their education program or to, bring in buses of kids from disadvantaged areas than they do to put on the show. So a lot of those donors are motivated by those other things more than they are about the art form itself often. So, yeah, I think something, a campaign that really demonstrated the impact of the arts could be effective.
Can I just add to that, Chair? It's Victoria Lynn from Tarawara. Visibility is often connected to the organisations that have the most funding. So, and they're the organisations that also attract the most donations and philanthropic grants. So the government gives to, for instance, the National Gallery of Victoria. The National Gallery of Victoria has enormous visibility, as does the Art Gallery of New South Wales, and that as a flow-on effect of attracting donations. And the small to medium sector doesn't have that kind of visibility and also can't compete at that level because, as we've said, because of capacity. So I think it does need a campaign, but it's more than a campaign. It's that government has to say that the arts are central and core to the well-being of our society. I mean, the arts are about reimagining our future. The arts bring people together. The arts are important for social cohesion. The arts are accessible to everybody. And it's if the government raises that profile of the arts, then I think other people in the community will follow. It's not just entertainment. It's not just a nice to have. It's not just an add-on. It's core to our well-being. And I think it has to be a campaign, but it also has to be at the heart of what government believes.
Thank you.
Great. You ready to move on, Ms. Stengel? Thank you. And can I just say, it is fantastic to hear this conversation because I've been in Parliament 10 years, and a few years ago, you would not have imagined that a conversation that really is about what Revive, the cultural policy, is about, would sort of be engaged with in this kind of way. And we're certainly looking forward to seeing the guidance and advice around the next Revive policy. So thank you. And in terms of why arts matters, it's wonderful to hear the commitment around spreading the word. and I think it really reflects that we've moved from just surviving to thinking about how we spread the word even more widely. So I'm really pleased to hear it. In terms of just putting some more recent data on the table, and in fact, Ms. Stegel, this goes to your question about the small to mediums, which we've all identified as being there's huge opportunities there. I think in 22, 23, it was about 30 million going to them, and that's up to about 42.4 million. So it's around about a 40% increase, 42% increase. But the data around the number of organisations that have received funding. So it was 91 small to mediums getting organisational funding, if that's the best way to describe it, in 23-24. And that went to 159 small to mediums in 24-25. But clearly there is, I think, in Western Sydney alone, there's a massive opportunity there. So I just thought I'd put that data into the conversation. Ms. Price, would you like to ask some questions?
Yes, I would. Thank you, Chair. So
Thank you.
Thanks a lot. I just wouldn't mind going back. Let's talk a little bit more about the donor base, because obviously, we're talking about grants, and obviously for many of your organisations' survival, the amount of people who decide to support you is obviously very important. So we've heard that the main contributors, by and large, is still the big end of town, and obviously it's important for all of your organisations to grow the pie of philanthropists. And we've also heard that the mum and dad investors are not what they used to be. I think someone said maybe their support is drying up, and somebody suggested that they were now supporting other social causes. So because I think this is a very important issue for many of your organisations, I wonder whether there's been any work done, and maybe this is something the government could think about if you haven't done it, to ask the simple question as to why they're no longer supporting you. I just wonder when people fall off your database, your donor base, whether any of the organisations on the line are asking the question as to why you're no longer supporting any particular arts organisation. Just wonder if anyone's got any observations to make.
Yeah, I can answer that. It's Victoria Lynn from Tarawara. Some philanthropic trusts and foundations will fund you for 3 years, and then they move on to another organisation. So they say, look, we'll fund you in this startup phase. For instance, for our education program, we got fantastic funding from the Margaret Lawrence bequest, but now that funding stopped and they've moved on. So we're always trying to raise more funds to replace that amount of money, because of course you start to run programs, you employ staff with that initial money. So I think that happens quite a lot. And yeah, that's all I wanted to say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so Victoria, I think what you're referring to is I'm just going to call them the big end of town. What I'm focusing on, and I think if we had a lot more smaller contributions that are sort of locked in for life, that's got to be a better outcome for you in terms of just supporting your sustainability. So I'm interested in those mum and dad investors, how we can actually increase that pie.
I think you find that those mum and dad investors are giving, say, $30 a month to the Red Cross or to the Cancer Council. I think it's just not in the practice in our culture and in our society for Australians to think that they should be giving that to a cultural organisation, even though they might spend $25 going to the movies and another $25 getting popcorn or what have you. I think there needs to be some work done on how to shift the mindset of Australians in terms of what they give to culture. And also there is a sense in terms of, like, we have members, it's very reasonable. But they say, oh, it might not be worth us continuing because we don't come often enough. So there's a sense that giving has to have a benefit for people rather than just simply giving to support.
Okay.
Before Ms. Price, you move off that question, I just think it might be relevant to ask. I know in the Live Performance Australia submission, there were a couple of things mentioned, one around encouraging payroll giving for arts orgs, particularly from younger donors. So I don't know whether that is worth adding into this part of your discussion, and just around that intergenerational transfer that we know is coming through estate planning and bequests. I'm not sure, Ms. Tran, whether you want to add on from some of the things in your submission to what Ms. Lynn has just said.
I think, as I said, one of the key issues that some members have raised with us is around, again, this is more the big end of town, is the generational priorities are changing as those big foundations, if they're being passed on to the next generations, that their priorities are just different. And so hence there's concern about whether they will continue to get support because of the changing priorities. And hence, I think it goes back to some of these comments that have already been made, is how do we then shift the mindset of that giving to arts and culture is actually a worthy cause in amongst all the other types of causes that exist. How can we elevate that profile so that to help resonate to those people that arts and culture is worthwhile as well.
Okay, so I might just go back to the original point of my question was really just trying to understand why, I'm just going to call them mum and dad supporters, why they might join and support your organisation. And then the next question is, why do they stop supporting you? And I'm interested to know is when they stop supporting you, in your case, Victoria, you're talking about a membership model. I appreciate a lot of arts organisations operate like that. Do we ask the question, why have they stopped supporting us? Because I think that is, they potentially for the future are a big part of the future funding pool for your survival. So I would like to think that we're going to focus on, well, why are they no longer supporting you? So I don't know if there's anyone else on the line that's got experience of, when you've asked the question, what the responses have been.
Melissa, I can speak to that. It's Tracy from Bus Stop Films. A lot of our mum and dad support comes from the parents of the participants of our programs. Primarily, our programs support people with intellectual disability, autism or Down syndrome, and that comes with often older parents. And our program supports people from 17 years and older, and our oldest participants are in their 50s. So sadly, unfortunately, it is that the parents might pass away or they move into their older retirement. They don't have that free disposable income to support, or their adult children are no longer involved in the program. And so it's really tied to supporting you and making a donation, because my adult children are beneficiaries of the programs that you're supporting. And if they leave the program, our accessible filmmaking program, then their donation goes with them. And so it's often tied to the community. And it's when you're working with a vulnerable community, it's really challenging for a nonprofit to raise funds from your community. You have to move to a position of raising funds for your community. So it is, targeting your communications and your engagement is often to people adjacent to who have a personal connection to the disability community or see that value, and their donation comes with an attraction or connection to wanting to have a quality of life for that community rather than a donation to the arts. And so for us, as for Bus Stop and the work that we create, often that donation comes with wanting to help disability employment or improve social connections for people with disability. And the medium that we do that through is through the arts. So when we do lose donors and they're no longer, supporting us, it's often because that they don't have that connection to a participant in our program, which would be similar to maybe a membership example. But that's for us how those donors have moved on, particularly the mum and dad ones.
Okay.
It's Fiona Menzies talking. If I may just add to that, I actually would challenge your premise that that's where the increase in donations to the arts is going to come from. I mean, it's actually surprisingly much easier to get a $100,000 grant than it is to get $1,100 donations from 1,000 people. It's also much simpler, and, you know, one thing that it's really imperative that policymakers understand about operating an arts organisation is every different source of funding you have has to be stewarded and managed. So, you know, if you've got one $100,000 donor, you can have the conversations, you can include them in special events and things like that. But if you have to do the same thing for 1,000 people, that's completely different. So, and the same goes for, I think, Ms. Steggall's inquiries about these small grants. Every time you have to apply for a grant, it's a lot of work that goes into writing the grant application. You've got a tiny prospect of being successful, but then if you are successful, then you have to acquit the grant. So we need to just be mindful about the impact and the resources that are sucked out of arts organisations by whatever kind of fundraising it is, whether it's applying for grants or getting philanthropy. It's a cost to the business to get money, and that's part of every business, right? But we don't want to be encouraging things or thinking that the solution lies in things that are going to be more of a burden to the arts organisation than a benefit.
Thanks, Fiona. I think it's a great reminder that, you know, it's human resources that have to do the administration of running the businesses, and I fully appreciate that. Much easier to get a grant of 100,000, but my fear is, and you know this better than we do, that, you know, they might start to dry up. So I'm thinking about, well, how do we make sure that all of these organisations involved in our arts and culture in Australia survive? Because I don't think it's through government grants. So anyway, I appreciate exactly what you're saying, and the administration of your organisation takes humans to do that, and humans cost money. So I appreciate that. So while I've got you there, Fiona.
Actually, Ms. Price, can I just say, Mr. Valagiorgio would like to add something too.
Very good, thank you.
Thank you. I just like Jordan speaking for the record. I absolutely fully agree with that. I, like many people in Western Sydney and members of the Western Sydney Arts Alliance, you know, we have the pleasure of a bookkeeper. The administrative burden of a receipt, a monthly, it is too much. It is too complex. Fundraising itself is already quite a costly enterprise. So, of course, you want to maximise those efforts to those donations where, you know, as has been mentioned, you've got one person to steward rather than 300. My organisation and a few others in the Western Sydney Arts Alliance have chosen not to participate in those kind of programs at the moment because it is actually too burdensome and costly in terms of return on investment. I'd also like to bring up another point that I've been remiss in not raising when we talk about donors, donations, and motivations, in that I'd like to acknowledge that I have privilege because of my skin tone and the way I present and the kind of art form I come from. But particularly in Western Sydney, that isn't the reality for a lot of artists and arts organisations whose very existence is political, whose work is, in a sense, risky because of donors looking, whether that's to mitigate risks of political backlash or of any kind of negative response, or, you know, on both sides, perhaps consideration of what control looks like with art and what art is interesting or challenging. And while I don't think a lot of the risks, the assessment of the risk that people hold actually reflects the reality on the ground of the work, that is something that I would like to acknowledge. And we are in a political climate that has been very complex for a lot of people. And I'd also like to add on donations to large institutions that when financial crises have happened at some of these institutions, you get a sense of where their priorities lie. And when you see what is cut, you understand that intersectional communities are often the first to go. And I think it's important to recognise that as well, that donor development teams, with the best intentions, can unfortunately have unexpected consequences on the rest of the sector when you have to look at prioritising keeping your organisation going. Thank you.
Thank you, Jordan. Oh, we're really opening up a can of worms here. Anyone else like to make a contribution on donors, big or small?
I think you're ready. I'm not seeing any hands up or indications.
Thank you, Chair. So I think Fiona did refer to it previously about talking about the Tarrawara submission, where you described, I think, that the 100% tax deduction for donations, I think in the words of the submission was that it was appropriate. But we note that other submissions have proposed 150% deduction. So what I'm interested in knowing is, have any of the organisations actually crunched any numbers based on 150% as to what that might mean for your organisation?
I'm not seeing. I'm not seeing anyone who has an answer to that.
Okay. All right, Chair, I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. Okay, I've just got to, we've touched on some of these things, but I'm just going to pick up on some of the things that have been said. Actually, one thing that we haven't talked a lot about is the DGR status and the deductible gift recipient sort of framework. There's been a lot of discussion throughout various submissions and the inquiry about it. So I just wanted to get your thoughts. I might start perhaps with Tallawarra. I'm not sure who would like to speak to it, but just your thoughts around, particularly around the recommendations of the Productivity Commission and how it might make a difference.
Look, DGR status is extremely important for us, and I'm not across the recommendations, and Fiona might be more across them than I am. But it's absolutely worth the investment to improve it if we can. It's essential. Fiona?
Yeah, I mean, I think the system needs to be simplified, and I think that's been something that's been on the cards for government for about 20 years, actually. So hopefully they'll actually do it at some point. I think there probably are issues around eligibility that need to be looked at, but I'm sure that's already been done. Somebody did earlier raise the issue of PBIs, so I'm not sure if all committee members are aware of the differences between just having DGR status and having PBI or public benefit institution status. So usually places like hospitals are PBIs, and what you can access as an organisation if you're a PBI is different sort of benefits that allow you to give benefits, for example, to your staff. So in low-paying sectors, staff are essentially getting the benefit of being paid more than they're actually being paid. So there is, I think, some arts organisations have sort of suggested that maybe arts organisations could be PBIs. I think that is really a big picture policy question for governments about what they want PBIs to be doing and what they want DGR to do. But I think the whole system can be simplified, and I know that people have been working on that for some time.
Thank you. Any other contributions around, well, my original question was around DGR and really what it offers you that government funding doesn't, what role it plays for you.
Susan, it's Tracy here from Bus Stop Films. For us, it's vital. We've just, as you know, we filmed it in your electorate. Boss Cat, our first feature film. It's a commercial production. It's the biggest project we've ever undertaken. And normally we're making arts from a community program lens, and making a commercial project has risk with it, but it's a bigger one for us. Having that DGR status meant, as the producers and production companies, we could generate donations to Bus Stop that we could then invest into the film as the producers. So hopefully when it goes into cinemas later this year, and it has commercial success either through streaming or licensing, that we have a greater skin in the game as a return on investment alongside Screen Australia and the private investment and the distributor. So it grew, having that capacity grew our what we would get out of the film beyond the social impact through to continue our cause and mission around disability employment. And that was something that helped us attract investment into the production, because we were able to offer investors either straight up investment, they could invest their own money into the production, or donate to Bus Stop Films so that we can then take that money and invest it as our slice as the producer and help us with our sustainability. So that DGR status to us is vital day to day, and also to be able to offer the salary sacrificing and other measures to our staff, being a PBI organisation, but for producing a commercial production as a non-profit, that was quite advantageous to us to be able to get that project financed and also grow the amount of potential return on investment we would get that would help us with our sustainability into the future. And we did attract some philanthropic donations to us specifically for that purpose, that they were giving that donation to us for us to then invest into the production. Thank you. Sorry, my voice is going a bit.
Thank you. Look, just in the few minutes we've got, could I ask Mr. Valle Giorgio just about a small capability grant program? And I guess that for each of you, you've just mentioned things in your submission about building capacity and skilling organisations up. I'm really conscious that people are already, especially in small to mediums, as has been said, they're really stretched already. But for Western Sydney Arts Alliance members, what would be a minimum level of funding around building capability grant program that would make a meaningful difference to your Western Sydney Arts Alliance membership, do you think?
Thank you, Chair. I think there's some complexities to still be worked there. Fundamentally, a difference from what is currently existing would be actually paying the person that is funded. So paying someone in the organisation to develop that capacity as well as the capability training. Because the reality is, and while we don't have full access to the data to show equity gaps and who's being represented from where, our own investigations and our anecdotal experiences show that there's an underrepresentation from Western Sydney because we are time poor, we are overworked, and there are a lot of external stressor factors. And I think that would be the kind of measure that would allow, communities that are underrepresented in Australia the capacity to get over the line to participate in existing programs. So while, yes, we should be increasing the way the match funding works, fundamentally, I think being able to pay someone in an organisation to learn those skills would be very beneficial.
And just picking up on that, the Tarrawarra Museum of Art submission argued the same issue around a lack of capacity. Would it be viable for several small to medium arts organisations to effectively share a fundraising officer, or is there a model that could work in different areas?
We are all, it's Victoria Lynn from Tarrawarra speaking. We're in competition with one another for fundraising. There are one or two individuals who practice at a strategic level and work for several organisations to advise us on strategy. And we're working with one of those at the moment. If if you were to ask how much we would need to pay somebody and how long it would take, we looked at this recently. We would be needing to pay someone $150,000 a year for 2 years to really start a proper strategic process of raising serious funding for the organisation. And we don't have the capacity to pay salaries at those levels. I mean, this is an industry whose salaries are all below what people in the corporate world would earn. Another idea I had was that government partner with a philanthropic organisation, and then we're not in competition with one another, because we can apply, to that philanthropic organisation through government or somehow some kind of system. Also, I just wanted to mention the opacity of the philanthropic sector for all of us, and it would be great to have data, like a survey done of where philanthropic money is going to the arts right across the country, so we could all get a sense of a benchmark for ourselves as much as for anybody.
And can I ask, in terms of the 3 key data points that you'd love to see, have you got a top 3?
I think we need to know why people are giving, how much they're giving, and what kinds of organisations that they're funding. I think we all still are caught up in that thing that we have to show that art is a benefit to society. There's not a sense of just funding art for the arts. I think transparency about what's available. A lot of these philanthropic trusts and foundations, they have to invite you to submit. There are very few now with open calls.
I'm experienced speaking. I would also just add to that, Chair, that it would be really useful to know what people are giving for. So are they giving for the education program? Are they giving for the disadvantaged kids to come to the show? Because that helps arts organisations understand what's of interest to donors. And I come back to my original point, which is you've got to be asking the donors, what are they interested in? What's going to change it for them?
Thank you all so much. I'm just going to do one last check to see if anyone is sitting there going, oh, I forgot to say something just before I wrap up. But Ms. Tran.
Thank you. I just wanted to say that the arts sector is a wonderfully diverse sector. It includes lots of small, medium, large organisations, and they all have a really important role to play. And I guess the needs of those different parts of the sector may be very different, which is so as part of the considerations it's for this inquiry is like, how can you best support not only the sector as a whole, but the individual or the component parts? And equally, when it comes to donors, it's the same as well. They're also wonderfully diverse when you've got the big end of town and your mums and dads. And how can we therefore support all those as part of that donor ecosystem to be a part of it and give? And part of that comes down to their motivations, but there may be something to do that helps incentivise those different parts. So there might be some recommendations that may not be as relevant for the bigger end of town, but might be really something that does move the dial for those smaller donors. And they're all, I think, a really important part of that ecosystem. Thank you.
Well, you guys have certainly given us all a lot to reflect on as we, sort of move towards the tail end of our hearings. So thank you very much for your attendance today. If you've been asked to provide any additional information, could you please send this information to the Secretariat by the 18th of August? You'll also be sent a copy of the transcript of your evidence, to which you may suggest corrections. But can I thank you very much for sharing your knowledge, expertise, experience and insights. And we'll now release you from the hearing, and we will move to our next witness, which is the Productivity Commission. We'll just pause for a moment to let that transition happen. But thank you all very much.
Thank you.
And it does look like I have our witnesses from representing the Productivity Commission. So I will keep the hearing continuing and call on those representatives. For the Hansard record, could you please state your full name and the capacity in which you appear before the committee?
Thanks, Chair. Alex Robson, Deputy Chair of the Productivity Commission.
Thank you, Mr. Robson. As these proceedings are public, they're being broadcast and recorded by Hansard. If you wish to have evidence heard in private, please let the committee know and we'll consider your request. Although the committee does not require you to give evidence under oath, I wish to advise you that this hearing is a formal proceeding of the Parliament. Giving false or misleading evidence is a serious matter and may be regarded as contempt of Parliament. If you object to answering a question, please state the reasons for your objection and the committee will consider the matter. We have copies of your submissions, so thank you very much. And by way of introduction, I'm Susan Templeman, the chair of the committee, and I'll ask my other committee members to introduce themselves, beginning with I think the deputy chair. I'm just looking to see. Yes, I've got you. There you are.
Thank you, Chair. My name's Mary Aldred. I'm the member for Monash in southeast Victoria, which is part of the Great Gippsland region.
And perhaps Ms Price and Ms Steg, I'll let you introduce yourselves.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mr Robson, for joining us. Melissa Price here. I'm the federal member for Durack, which is 50% of Western Australia. Thanks for your time today.
Hi, I'm Zali Stegel, federal member for Warringah, from the lower North Shore to the Northern Beaches in Sydney.
Thank you very much. And look, Mr Robson, I'll ask you to make an opening statement if you'd like. And can I just thank you because I don't know if we've done a word count, but I think Productivity Commission has come up pretty regularly as one of the most used phrases as we've been having these hearings and in submissions that have been put to us. So we really appreciate you spending time with us.
Well, thanks for the invitation. I don't have an opening statement. I'm happy to go straight to questions, Chair.
Fantastic. Now, the reason I think you have been become a real focus is around the Productivity Commission recommendations that you've worked on. And I suppose just can we get a broad picture of the sorts of proposals that you put forward, in particular, I guess, how it might benefit arts organisations and people who are looking to donate to arts orgs.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. So I might talk briefly about our philanthropy report and give you a sense of, the major recommendations that are relevant for this committee. We were tasked by the government with, taking a very broad look at the philanthropy landscape and policy in Australia. There's a lot of analysis of data and who gives and how much and patterns and trends and so on, motivations for giving. So that's always important to start with. I do know, though, and there were some comments, I think, at the end of the previous session around the lack of data around where donations go in terms of sectors, and that was one of the barriers that we found as well. That data in Australia doesn't, there's not a comprehensive data set of when you make a tax deductible donation, in your tax return, you don't have to say where it went to, or the ATO doesn't break it down by sector. So we didn't make a recommendation around that, but it is something to note, I think. The major recommendations in our report focused around so-called deductible gift recipient status, and basically when we had a look at it, and it's not an exaggeration to say that it's the first comprehensive look at this in the better part of 100 years. We found a system that was broken. It was complex. The rules around it were opaque. Charities, when they established themselves, couldn't be sure whether they would get tax-deductible status or not. So there's a difference between becoming a charity and where under what heading you're registered, and then you have to apply for DGR status, and that's the ATO that does that. So they're two different things. And we just got a lot of feedback, particularly from grassroots organisations across all sectors, that this was an issue. And so that was one of the main sort of findings, and some of the recommendations were framed around that. Stepping back a bit, though, I mean, the question is, well, why does tax deductibility status matter? And we did some fairly comprehensive statistical analysis of that and found that, well, yes, if you give a tax deduction to people, they tend to donate more. And that's really the first step, is to say, well, does it matter? And it turns out it does. And we quantified that. So then, having found that evidence, the next step is to think about, well, what does the system look like? And if it's broken, how could it be improved? So what we recommended was coming up with a set of principles around what it should mean to have this special status, so you can receive tax-deductible donations, and then also setting that out more clearly so that charities have an expectation, more so than they do today, that, well, if I can show that I'm creating a public benefit and a tax-deductible status is the best way for the government to fund that, and there's no link between what I'm doing and any fees that I'm charging, which are the three sort of principles that we talked about, then I should expect to get DGR status. Like it's not guaranteed, but if you set out some principles, that was the idea. And so that was the main thrust of the report, is to say reform the DGR system, and the way we set it out, it would allow between, we estimated around 10 to 20,000 charities additionally to gain this status at a very modest fiscal cost that we estimated. And so we think it would increase the diversity of charities that could receive these tax-deductible funds. It would make it a bit more of a level playing field. It would reduce complexity and just have a better system all round. With the idea of not necessarily, so the government had a goal of doubling giving by 29-30. We didn't take that as a goal of the report. We said, well, that's the government's goal, but how can we improve the foundations to facilitate any growth in giving and make the system better? So that was really the thrust of the DGR reforms. And then there's other recommendations around public information and regulation, which we can talk about, and also around giving vehicles and Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander networks and giving in that respect. But I would just say we didn't really take a sectoral focus because the idea was to look at philanthropic giving as a whole, and wherever Australians wanted to direct their giving with that government support in the form of a tax deduction, we wanted to come up with reforms that were sort of neutral to the sector that it went to, noting that arts and culture is obviously a very important sector, but from the point of view of that reform, it was we couldn't say that one sector was better than the other, because there are many charities that do great work across Australia in all sorts of different capacities. Thousands of millions of Australians volunteer to all sorts of organisations, and so we didn't feel it was appropriate or necessary even to single one sector out. So that's a summary of some of those recommendations.
Can I ask you, I appreciate you weren't sector specific and looking at it, but if the DGR framework was redesigned around your principles, what kinds of charities that currently miss out that would then be eligible might, or I guess, what are the features of that would be relevant to arts organisations that might then be captured? It's just trying to get a picture of how they might currently miss out, but be able to access it with the changes.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. We did provide some examples in the report. Now, it was a while ago, so you're testing my memory as to those examples. But the other point is there's a lot of, in the current system, quite a few sort of anomalies where, particularly in advocacy around health and other issues. So, yeah, I can't think of the top of my head whether we had any examples around culture and arts, other than to say that, the general principles that we came up with where, the first question that you'd want to ask about an organisation is whether taxpayer support of any form is justified because it's producing some sort of wider benefit, as opposed to just paying for a service and the individual gets the benefit. And so many, there'd be many arts and cultural organisations that would, that would fit that characteristic. And the second criterion is, well, is a tax deduction the best way to encourage something that's undersupplied? So, you can give grants to cultural and arts organisations, but they come with their own, advantages and disadvantages, and so it might be more effective and efficient just to allow them to have a taxpayer support. And the final one was, whether a particular organisation, even though it's doing those other two things, it might be sort of charging for some service, like a museum is charging a fee, or so that. But even then, it doesn't preclude taxpayer support. It's just something where we thought, well, if there's a sort of pay for service and the organisation is getting that money directly, that's something that you'd want to be careful about giving taxpayer support to that. You'd want to make sure that those broader public benefits are there and they're not being captured by that paying that fee for service. So there'd be arts and cultural organisations that would meet all three criteria. That it's hard for me to come up with examples. But I guess the point is that once you've established those principles, it does sort of set, and if you were to set that up, it would send a signal to all sorts of organisations. Well, this is really what we think the purpose of philanthropy is. It's to encourage activities that may otherwise be undersupplied, that people can't make a dollar out of, but are valuable to the broader community, and that this taxpayer support in the form of this deduction is the best way to do it relative to some alternative of annual grants and paperwork and funding that runs out every couple of years and all of these things where we did get a lot of feedback around that sort of support, which while it was welcome, it's not often a good substitute for being able to say, if you make a donation, you can get a tax deduction. It's a different way of doing it, and in many cases that will be a better way of doing it.
And I've got one more question before I hand over to my deputy chair. Actually, maybe two questions. One is just in terms of the evidence we've taken around the complexity of applying for DGR status and the burden on small to medium organisations. What regulatory reform do you see as being the most effective in reducing that burden, yet still meeting, standards of accountability and transparency?
Well, I think in terms of the DGR reform, that the idea is to, we heard from people who have been waiting for years to hear back from the tax office about whether they were successful or not, and this is very small organisations. In the public hearings, we had examples from people who were set up kitchen gardens and these sorts of very grassroots organisations that, had been waiting years. They needed to get advice on, how to apply and what actual criteria to apply under, because there's a range of those, and it may not line up with what your charitable purpose is. So I think the DGR reforms we recommended, both around sort of aligning charitable purpose and getting DGR status, to making that more better aligned and rational from that perspective, and just making it more seamless, and reducing those delays. And then that would also create, stepping back a bit, as I talked about before, that expectation that, well, there's a set of principles here, and that would reduce the uncertainty that a charity would have, because many charities we heard from, they become, they get charitable status and then think, what's the situation with our tax deductible status? That's totally different. Will we get it or not? Then there's delays, and so that can really hamper them in their operations. So I guess, the simplicity, making it more seamless, and that would happen if we had this DGR reform that we recommended.
And the last question I want to ask, you talked about the data, the challenging getting data. It's come up a lot of times. In terms of collecting data on the place that donations, the sector that it was allocated to, is the tax return the most effective way to identify that and capture that data?
Well, we didn't make any recommendations on that. So I don't really want to give an opinion on it. We did make a recommendation around corporate giving, and making that more transparent. And so, around 13, in the data that we have, around $13 billion in donations every year in total, and around, I think it was right, $4.5 billion from individuals, and then the rest are from corporates and other sort of organisations. So corporate giving is a big chunk of what happens, but there is a sort of lack of transparency. It's self-reported. There's no obligation to tell shareholders necessarily where the money's gone and what it's being used for. So you could do that for that sort of transparency thing for individuals, but we did make a recommendation around corporates as well, which I think goes to the spirit of what you're talking about. And at least depending on how you did it, you could do it. Name a sector that the money went to for corporates, and that would give you that information. So I guess my point is, yes, we did make a recommendation around corporates. But doing it through the ATO for individuals would only be part of the. Even if you did it, that would only be a part of the story and not necessarily the bulk of it. So you'd need to do, even if you did the ATO thing for individuals, you'd need to get the full picture. You'd need to do some other things. It's not enough.
Thank you very much, Deputy Chair. I can see the mute's still on there. I might, while we're finding Deputy Chair, Ms. Stagel, would you like to, I can see you, so it's easy to know that you're there to...
I think Mary had to leave, Chair.
I may have been so engrossed in the conversation I've missed her message. So.
I guess I was interested in, you've touched on it a bit around that idea that for the DGR status, that charities needing to show how much their work benefits the community. I feel like that's a very high, it's a difficult high bar because it's so, it's all encompassing, and previous witnesses were talking about, in fact, the arts is central to our society and social cohesion in so many ways. So what were your thoughts around that, the tests around that DGR status sometimes are a little too onerous or not?
Yeah, I mean, the thrust of the report was, well, first of all, we didn't expect that a charity would be able to estimate that and say how much. It was that limb of the three-part test was meant to be a very low bar, and we would expect that almost all charities would be able to pass that hurdle because that's their bread and butter, and there's already a similar phrasing for the ACNC. So that one, the whole idea of the proposed reforms was to be, make it easier to get DGR status, not harder, to expand choice and diversity. And so that would be a matter for others in terms of the design, but the spirit of it is very much, not to make it a hurdle. It's more to facilitate, additionality, and also charities that don't currently get it for whatever reason, to set out some principles. So it wasn't even really a sort of formal test. It was more, here's a set of principles which we think should support the DGR system. Now, how you implement those, would be a different question. But it was really setting up that broader architecture to say, what do we actually want this system to do, and who do we want it to apply to? And that had never been done anywhere in the world, actually. So that was one of the contributions, was to say, what is the purpose of this, and what groups really are deserving, and who should get it.
Yeah. Another area, I guess, we've heard from witnesses around discrepancy of access to funding, to philanthropy, regional to urban, Western to Eastern Sydney, those aspects. Obviously, data becomes pretty crucial in understanding that. So what data and information is currently collected, and how much more, should we be collecting and publicly reported? And who should take care of that? Because again, we don't know this. If we're not collecting the data, how do we know the scale of the problem, and how do we fix the problem if we're not acknowledging the scale of the problem?
Yeah, I mean, we made a number of recommendations around. The ACNC sort of publishes a lot of data and collects a lot of data. So we made a number of recommendations around specific bits of information, and they're sort of very technical sort of regulatory issues that were raised. I guess the broader recommendation was around taking whatever data we have and being able to use it better, and to show the value that charities are actually doing. So that one of the sort of main thrusts of the report is there is a lot of data, but it's not necessarily being sort of used as well as it could, or so if I want to donate to a charity, I can go and find information about it on the ACNC website, but they're just there may be better ways of telling a potential donor what that charity is doing, how much value they're creating, these sorts of things. So it was more around not necessarily imposing more of a burden, particularly on smaller charities, to ask them for more information. It was just taking the existing information and doing more with it. But having said that, a lot of donations and philanthropy is based on networks and who you know, and those relationships, and often that sort of knowledge it's just not amenable to data. But it is something that's very important, particularly in the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander space. We found that the networks that exist there are not as necessarily as comprehensive as they could be relative to other networks, and so we made a recommendation there around government setting up government funding the setting up of an entity that would sort of encourage the building of those networks. So, it is giving, motivations for giving do depend on data, but it's also these other broader relationships and networks where, you couldn't collect data, and you may not necessarily even want data on that, but they're still very important.
I did have a question. Obviously, I guess it's relating to that, the broader societal impact, but obviously we've got major other sectors requiring funding from government because of mental health, social cohesion, loneliness epidemics. We've got a lot of areas. And ironically, obviously, the arts and can really help solve some of those impacts and really play a role in, I think, preventative impact on a lot of other areas. How much are you looking at that to maybe boost, I guess, the government's focus on prioritising it for funding, for example, in how can we draw that prevention bow of impact?
So it was, I think one of the anomalies in the DGR system does relate exactly to preventative health. And so, but more broadly, we did think a lot about what is it that charitable donations are actually doing within that broader system of government support. And a lot of the feedback we got was, suggested an important role in terms of filling gaps between what the government does and doesn't do, and then charities come in and then fill those gaps. There's a broad philosophical, debate which we didn't engage with too much, but it's very important around, shouldn't government do more, which would necessarily then probably mean that charities may not do as much. We didn't really get into that, but that's a debate that's out there. But you're right in terms of prioritisation. That's in terms of grants and direct funding. Those are sort of government decisions. I guess the point we arrived at was, well, if there's this volunteering going on and charitable donations that are going on. People are directing it to the causes they feel most strongly about. And it's, if you're going to provide a tax deduction, it's not, within those three broad principles that I talked about, it's very difficult and probably undesirable for governments to be able to pick and choose and say, well, for example, this sector should get a higher tax deduction or lower tax deduction. You could do that, but then you are in the business of picking winners, and if there's government priorities, that could be one way of doing it. But we took a different view to say, well, the whole point of philanthropic donations is that people are making an individual choice based on where they see need the most. It's a highly personal decision to give. It does create a relationship potentially between yourself and the recipient, or at least the charity. And so the best way to facilitate all of that and build up that social capital is to make that tax deductible system as neutral as we can. Not saying that arts is more or less important than anybody else, but we didn't make that value judgment.
Yeah, and then you touched on the not supporting greater concession when it comes to superannuation tax concessions. Obviously, there's been a lot of discussion that there's a generational change around that philanthropic giving that's going to occur, and the question of whether there will be a drop-off of philanthropic support for the arts because of, with new generation, might come focus on other social, concerns and charities and other sectors. From environmental to health to other areas. So, because it's clearly increased over time, and that connection to certain philanthropy of arts may not be there for the next generation. I guess, what assessment have you made, has the Productivity Commission been able to make of potentially that through, and obviously there is such a pool of money through the superannuation system, and there is that question of, whether or not there is excess, obviously, in superannuation, and then what then gets inherited and passed on, and whether or not that is an opportunity for that philanthropic giving to arts sector.
Yeah, it's something we thought about and took submissions on and at public hearings and heard quite a bit about. I think the place that we arrived at was that superannuation is already sort of tax advantaged, and then you do already have these giving vehicles so-called PAFs and PUAFs, which have now had a name change, and other changes that the government's actually implemented. So those sort of vehicles already exist, but on superannuation, we came to the conclusion that we heard the case. We didn't think it was really made out that there should be additional support provided to that vehicle. I mean, in aggregate, we estimated that even with no policy change, there'd be a considerable increase in giving over the next to 29-30. We found that if my memory's right, it was around 13 billion, as I said before, and we estimated it would double by 29-30, even with no policy change. So, that's where we arrived at with respect to superannuation.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's our time gone, but really appreciate being able to have this discussion with you. So thank you for your attendance today. If you've been asked to provide any additional information, please send this information to the Secretariat by the 18th of August. I don't think you were. You will be sent a copy of the transcript of your evidence to which you may suggest corrections. But thank you very much. And the hearing will now suspend for 30 minutes.
Thanks, Chair.
the hearing into arts and cultural philanthropy. And I now call representatives of Creative Australia and Office of the Arts. For the Hansard record, would you please state your full names and the capacity in which you appear before the committee? And
We've lost you, Ms.
Sorry.
Just jumped on mute.
Sorry.
yeah, I've got you on my screen, so I'm happy for you to kick off.
Excellent. My name is Lara Wolski. I'm the Executive Director of Development and Partnerships here at Creative Australia.
Hi, I'm Jane Lovelock. I'm Director of Private Investment at Creative Australia. And hello, I'm Gillian Mercer and I'm the Director of Business Development and Partnerships at Creative Australia.
And over to Office for the Arts.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Ali Todd. I'm the current Acting First Assistant Secretary of the Office for the Arts.
And I'm Julia Borkwell. I'm current Acting Assistant Secretary at Arts Development and Investment at Office for the Arts.
Thank you. For the Hansard record, I'll go to the next paragraph. As these proceedings are public, they're being broadcast and recorded by Hansard. If you wish to have evidence heard in private, please let the committee know and we'll consider your request. Although the committee does not require you to give evidence under oath, I wish to advise you that this hearing is a formal proceeding of the Parliament. Giving false or misleading evidence is a serious matter and may be regarded as contempt of Parliament. If you object to answering a question, please state the reasons for your objection and the committee will consider the matter. We have copies of your submissions and also of the additional information that you've provided to us following your first appearances. By way of introduction, I'm Susan Templeman, Chair of the committee, and I'll ask other committee members to introduce themselves, starting with Ms. Steggall.
Oh, hi, it's Ali Steggall. I'm the Federal Member for Warringah from Lower North Shore to Northern Beaches in Sydney.
And I'm just checking who else I have on the line at this point. Possibly no one. This always the danger coming back after a short break. So I expect us to be joined by others as the hearing goes on. And if I can see that they're there, I will flag that. I don't know whether you would like to make an opening statement, but now is the opportunity, particularly as there's been quite a gap between the first appearances and where we are now, and a lot of evidence taken. So I'll invite you to make an opening statement if you would like to. I think Office of the Arts, hand over to you.
Thanks, Susan. Yes, I do have a very brief opening statement. I would, of course, like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land where I am today, which is the Ngunnawal and Ngambri people. I pay my respects to elders past and present. I also extend that acknowledgement to the traditional owners of the lands on which you are today, and to all First Nations people joining us today. Thank you for the opportunity to appear again before the committee on behalf of the Department of Infrastructure, Transport, Regional Development, Communications, Sport and the Arts. We welcome this opportunity to discuss the framework supporting philanthropy in the arts, as well as learn from the inquiry about potential opportunities to strengthen philanthropic engagement, practice and investment in the sector. Deputy Secretary Dr. Stephen Arnott attended an earlier hearing with you and has responded to the 2 questions on notice in relation to the definition of arts and cultural philanthropy and tax incentives available internationally. And I hope those responses met your requirements. I would like to take this opportunity to acknowledge the immense amount of work that our colleagues from Creative Australia have achieved in fostering a culture of philanthropy for the arts in Australia to support a more sustainable cultural sector. This is particularly the case following the transfer of the functions of Creative Partnerships Australia and its philanthropic connections to Creative Australia back in January 2023. This was a key deliverable of the National Cultural Policy Revive. Through Revive, the government made a deliberate commitment, which has now been implemented, to bring together philanthropic investment, with commercial investment and public investment in the arts under one body, establishing Creative Australia. The Office for the Arts within the department and Creative Australia have distinct roles, which I know can sometimes be confusing to people, which is why I understand we're appearing together, so that if we are unable to answer a question, maybe Creative Australia can, and vice versa. So we're really grateful to be joined by our colleagues from Creative Australia. We have responsibility for policy oversight and implementing some of the actions in Revive, which is a whole of government policy. We also deliver a broad range of funding programs, which you're aware of, including programs such as the Cultural Gifts program, which I'm sure is of particular interest to this inquiry. In the private investment space, Creative Australia works with artists and arts organisations, philanthropists and business to encourage and facilitate partnerships, mentoring and investment. Creative Australia also conducts research, advocacy, supports fundraising and delivers some of the government's matched funding programs. But we work very closely together. The Office for the Arts has been closely monitoring the submissions and hearings of this inquiry, particularly because the government is in the midst of the development of Revive's successor, the next National Cultural Policy. As a 5-year policy that is due to conclude next year, the new policy will build on the foundations of Revive, acknowledging the current era of technological, social and environmental change. In support of this, and just as a way of a brief update on how the current consultation is progressing on the next National Cultural Policy, public submissions were received between March and May of this year, and we received over 2,700 submissions. We have also concurrently been paying attention to the submissions made to this inquiry. There are 5 expert panels and a policy advisory group that have been appointed by the Minister for the Arts to help inform the public consultation and shape the cultural policy. The expert panels are using their lived experience and specialist knowledge to inform the Minister for the Arts and the policy advisory group about key issues and themes related to their pillar. The Policy Advisory Group, whose members represent a broad cross-section of the cultural and creative sector, is providing advice, industry perspective and strategic guidance to the Minister about key sector challenges and opportunities. Along with government funding, private sector fundraising, partnerships, co-productions and earned income, philanthropy plays an important role in financing and supporting arts and culture. It drives impact and supports sustainability, innovation and creative risk. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I'll hand over to Creative Australia. Thanks.
Thank you, Susan. I would also like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the many lands that my colleagues and I are joining you from today, and we pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging. Creative Australia, as the Australian Government's principal arts and investment and advisory body, is very pleased to appear before the committee again. And as you have heard throughout the hearings, the arts and cultural sector have a long and productive relationship with philanthropy. For many artists and arts organisations, private sector support is absolutely essential, supporting artistic ambition and their capacity to reach audiences and communities across the country. But we all know that philanthropy is also changing. Giving to and through the arts is increasingly about impact and the contribution arts and creativity make to well-being, to education and community connection, and we heard that a lot this morning in the hearing. This creates a really important moment to position arts and culture as a powerful partner for philanthropists seeking measurable cultural, social and community outcomes. And Creative Australia is focused on building the conditions that will allow this opportunity to grow. And since our last appearance, there are a number of updates that we would like to provide the committee. So firstly, in 25-26, the Australian Cultural Fund facilitated 16.3 million in donations and a record 1,263 campaigns were launched across the platform. This continues the fund's expansion as one of Australia's most significant mechanisms for mobilising private support for arts and culture. Secondly, we are strengthening capability for fundraisers. So this includes delivering a reimagined suite of matched funding opportunities, digital resources and workshops, and peer learning networks. In the last financial year, over 1,000 individuals participated in a workshop or free coaching session led by Creative Australia staff. These were held across all states and territories in metro, regional and remote locations. And thirdly, we continue to grow Oz Arts Day as our national giving day for the arts. The first Oz Arts Day raised $2.4 million from more than 5,600 donors, 48% of whom were first-time donors to the participating artists and arts organisations. Through the evidence and ideas emerging in this inquiry, we also see a clear appetite for philanthropy to work more closely with Creative Australia to fund projects of mutual interest. We welcome that warmly and can play an important enabling role. Creative Australia has also committed to a 10-year research program to track trends in private investment in arts organisations in Australia, providing a stronger evidence base for decision-making across the sector. And looking ahead, we believe the next National Cultural Policy provides an important platform to embed these ideas more deeply and build on the ambitions in Revive. And there are 4 areas where we see particular opportunity. The first is a demonstration Creative Industries Impact Investing Fund that would leverage public funds to attract repayable private capital to the arts, helping to diversify funding sources and build a more sustainable creative sector. The second is the potential to expand our current approach to increase private co-investment with us in projects of merit around shared priorities, so pooled funding. The third is building capability for long-term financial sustainability, including endowment models, bequest prospecting, and broader fundraising strategies that strengthen philanthropic investment over time. And the fourth and last opportunity is to strengthen advocacy, education and professional networks for structured giving by engaging wealth managers, financial advisors and other philanthropic intermediaries to embed investment to the arts in wealth planning. Artists and arts organisations across Australia are already doing extraordinary work to attract and sustain private support, often, as we know, with limited resources and in an increasingly complex environment. And so the challenge now is to ensure they have the infrastructure, the capability, the partnerships and the policy settings they need to grow that support. And so we very much thank the committee for the attention this inquiry brings to the opportunity for philanthropy in the arts and cultural sector. I look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Fantastic, thank you. And there's a bunch of things I might just start by picking up on in terms of the update. Around maybe, look, there's so many categories, but if we can talk about the research just as a starting point, because that's been one of the consistent themes we've heard, is a lack of depth of understanding with data. And you've talked about a 10-year research program to track the philanthropic trends. Can you tell me a little bit more about where that will reach, what it will gather?
Sure.
That'd be good to know.
Yeah. So at Creative Australia, yes, we have just committed to a 10-year research program to look at data from our multi-year organisations, so the organisations we fund for 4 years at a time. There are 167 organisations in that cohort, and what we will be doing is tracking the amount of private sector income over time so that we can understand where the funding mix is changing. And we can look at that data to also see which art forms are also attracting the most private sector support as well. And we're also going to be able to look at that data in terms of small, medium and large organisations as well. So we'll be able to draw some really rich insights and intelligence there to better target, I guess, our interventions in the future in this space. The other data that we collect is through something called our National Arts Participation Survey. So this is a longitudinal study that we do every 3 years. I think this is the 6th time we've done it, so it's been around for a long time. And one of the things we can track through that is how often Australians are giving to the arts. And our latest data says that 1 in 10 Australians give to the arts every year. That hasn't changed since 2022. It stayed stable in the 2025 survey. And what we were also able to see from that data is that young people, surprisingly, are giving more to the arts than older people. So those aged 15 to 24 are actually, it's 1 in 5 of those people, those young Australians are giving to the arts every year. I think in terms of data, we listened to the conversation this morning, potentially one of the areas for Creative Australia to explore into the future is more data and information around donors. what they're looking for and how we can better pitch arts and its social impact to donors into the future and support organisations in their pitches, particularly donors that aren't already engaged in donating to arts and culture.
When we think about the data you already have, and some of that, you've talked about how you're using the survey data, but things like the organisational financial data or the grant assessment information, is there any way that could be used to not just to tell us what is going on, but to assist philanthropists in building a picture of a sector or an organisation that might support, encourage them to be a donor to that group? Is there a way of using what you've got to kind of pitch to those donors?
I think absolutely that's an area of opportunity. I might throw to my colleagues, Gillian and Jane, who manage a lot of our donor relationships.
Thank you, Lara. Hi, everyone. Gillian Mercer is my name. And yes, absolutely, we can use our data. And as the government's advocacy body for arts and culture, we do use our data to share the insights that data is telling us. We collect both audited financial statements but also statistical reporting from our multi-year funded organisations, which provides us great insights into how they are prospecting and they are securing private investment. That data is broken down from both working with trusts and foundations, as well as individual donations, as well as event activity that raises funds specifically for projects. And we use that data to both advocate to the philanthropic sector, but also to our artists and arts organisations as well more broadly, so they can understand where there are good value propositions around their time that is spent in fundraising activity. An example of sharing that data with the philanthropic community is when we're working with Philanthropy Australia and presenting to that arts funder network, where we share on both those financial trends, but also the sentiments as well around the value proposition of arts and culture. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. And I will come to Ms. Stegel. I'll just ask one more question, then hand over to Ms. Stegel. I'm really conscious that all this sort of work obviously takes time and takes resources to do. If Creative Australia was given an explicit mandate to act more as a matchmaker between arts organisations and potential donors, would that make a difference? And I guess what would the opportunities or risks be in doing that?
Chair, if I may, yeah, absolutely. Well, I think as a starting point, I think there already is a mandate to some extent for us to be working with what I guess we call the supply side, right? We do a lot of work in supporting organisations in capacity building and fundraising. What are we to increase the number of donors that are giving and to introduce that into the structured giving conversation? I think there's a big conversation to be had in while we think about matchmaking is putting one donor with one organisation, there's a broader conversation in equipping the philanthropic sector with some frameworks to understand exactly what impact arts and culture has and where they can have the most effective intervention for them. So I would say that absolutely there's interest in us bringing philanthropy and arts together, but it's part of a broader conversation about sustainable relationship building. We know that the best kinds of philanthropy is multi-year giving, is long-term giving. How do we create the cultural environment where arts organisations are ready and equipped to bring big donors along with their journey and tell their stories, but also have donors initiate new relationships, express curiosity about the kinds of arts and culture they can support, and be able to go back to their boards and trustees and say, this is what we're supporting and this is the kind of social and cultural impact it has. So I think there is that mandate already, but working with both sides of both the arts sector and the philanthropic sector, bringing to the same understanding of what impact means in arts and culture.
We have had people sort of talk about, yes, it's something, it's part of what you do, particularly with the changes that have been made, but Does it make a difference in the relationship where government is explicitly asking for that? Give us some insight into being the type of organisation you are, whether that does actually make a difference.
I think one of the interesting things that came up in one of the last sessions was a statement from, I think it's Fiona Menzies, surrounding the reason that donors give. And I think there's a bigger conversation, and a mandate that's more appropriate also could be like helping create, because I think that it's not just about a government mandate for us to take on within this role, it's an opportunity for us to understand and dive into what donors actually want. Because I think as government and government agencies, we can say all we want about the reasons why people should give, but ultimately it's up to the philanthropic sector, high net worth individuals, those kind of mum and dad donors to understand why they're giving and why they might give to arts and culture. And that's, I think, the real pivot point for us.
Now, I'm just going to flag that a few of your words dropped out there. So when you're reviewing the Hansard of this, if there are words that you need to add in because we missed capturing them, that will be the place where it's happened. I'm going to ask Ms. Stegel if she'd like to take over for some
Thanks.
questions.
I guess first I'm just on the DGR reforms and status. Obviously, you've identified that it's kind of achieved. The reform's been, the Office of the Arts has identified that it's been achieved, but the ATO's submission did highlight that there's still challenges. And I mean, if I think of the Productivity Commission's evidence just before the break, talking about, look, in this sector that sort of the social benefit, community and social benefit is a bit of a tick that it's assumed that it's there. But the ATO does say there are still many organisations that don't succeed. So do you think the settings are right?
I'm happy to start responding to them, if you like, Jane.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Sally.
Yeah. So, look, yes, the action to transfer, the Register of Cultural Organisations was a commitment under Revive, and from our point of view, which we used to administer that, that's where I say that action has been completed. But I absolutely take your point that improvements can always be made. I think one of the challenges for the sector and one of the roles that both the Office for the Arts and Creative Australia play is about assisting the organisations that we deal with on a day-to-day basis to navigate those broader government systems, including, in terms of making applications for DGR status. We're not involved in that process in any level of detail anymore, but we absolutely continue to work with our stakeholders, hear their feedback, advocate for them in relation to the programs that are being administered by our colleagues across the Commonwealth. I'm not sure if Creative Australia have got anything further to add in relation to that.
I think you're on mute.
Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you. Sorry about that. Problems. I think that just to say that we do hear and recognise that through the Australian Cultural Fund, we provide arts.
You're on mute.
Sorry, Jane. I think what's happening is as soon as you talk, it takes me off. So I think we'll have to do our own sound. Apologies all.
Okay. What was that? Are we back in action?
Yep, we've got you.
Wonderful. Okay. Sorry. I'll be brief. How are we going, Lara? Good?
I think there's an echo. So
okay, now we're back in action. Just to say, through the Australian Cultural Fund, we work with thousands of arts organisations status. We recognise that it is a challenge to work through that system. There is an opportunity for them to fundraise through the Australian Cultural Fund, so there's still that vehicle there. And we recognise that I think there's more that we can do to support organisations to make that a lot easier and simpler. The work of our state managers and coaching arts organisations is a part of that, but we see that as an opportunity for us to kind of step in and provide that support too.
Okay. So it doesn't really tell me, do you think the settings are right in terms of, is it easy enough for organisations to get that DGR status? Because if that's, the evidence seems to suggest that it's a direct, there's more likelihood of attracting philanthropic support for those large organisations that do get DGR status. So getting that status becomes pretty important. So you do think the settings are right?
I think there's no doubt that the opportunity that having that DGR status provides is very key to those organisations being in a good position to attract donations. In terms of commenting, though, on the processes that are run by a different department, I really feel that that's not actually something I can comment on. I'm sorry.
And another area we've heard from, especially the small organisations, is getting operational funds. That the evidence around grants was that often it's for new projects, but not for maintaining organisations. Did you have any thoughts around the operational funding for organisations, which is not the sexy part of funding because you can't link it to a particular exciting project, but it is essential for any projects to ultimately get off the ground?
Yes, absolutely. So in terms of the largest volume actually of funding that comes from Creative Australia is for operational funding for those major performing arts companies and also for the small to medium sector. Obviously they are funding projects as well, but the most significant part of their investment and the investment that comes from government is for that operational funding. I'm not sure if Lara wants to add anything further to that.
Creative Australia also has a range of programs to support small and medium organisations with their fundraising strategies. So we have match funding programs at a beginner, intermediate and advanced level to help people sort of on their different stage of the fundraising journey and sophistication. We also have 5 standard managers offer free coaching and mentoring. Our sound is playing up. Apologies. 5 state managers that are based all over Australia providing that mentoring, coaching, workshops. We've also got digital resources on our website to support small to medium organisations with their fundraising. We've got the Australian Cultural Fund that I'm sure we'll get to that Jane looks after that allows those small to medium organisations to raise money through the platform. And we also have AusArts Day, which is that new National Giving Day for the Arts that can really engage small to medium orgs to participate and raise funds on that day. So there are a lot of other programs that we run.
Yeah, so we did get mixed evidence around the AusArts Day, that it was a lot of work for little reward, and then organisations feeling stuck with, if they don't do it, they don't get visibility, but it sucked up their resources for not much outcome. Did you have any thoughts on that?
I might go to my colleague, Gillian, who runs our AusArts Day work.
Can you hear us? No.
Sorry, we are having terrible issues with sound hearing you. Yes.
To turn their mic on and their sound on, and when they stop, they need to turn them off. So we just do it every time. Yeah, so I turn mine off both off now. I'll put my speaker on first. Speaker and mic. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, we can.
Apologies for the technological issues. We'll do our best to work through. The question was around AusArt Day. Thank you for the question. It is 2025 was the first time, the inaugural year for AusArt Day, and we had 323 participants, artists and arts organisations
joining us in this endeavour to create visibility around how the arts are funded, but also rallied together to turn that competition into co-opetition so that together as a sector we can advocate for our fundraising endeavours, both the need to fundraise but also the value proposition around the many varied benefits that arts participation and artistic practice contributes to a whole of society. Those 323 artists and arts organisations who participated raised over $2.4 million. Now, for a first-year endeavour, we think that was a really great outcome by the participants. We acknowledge that participating in a sector-wide giving day is not a short-term endeavour. In fact, the methodology that we promote for success to participate is a 6 or 8 week campaign, of which there is a quiet phase that is not public, where we encourage you to engage with your donor community to gain their interest, whether or not donors might like to play a matched funding role within that Giving Day 12-hour concentrated activity, or if they'd like to participate in a power hour, or perhaps they could even be a launching donor or a landing donor. So there is a lot of work in participating in Oz Art Day. I think most of our participants understand that, and I think that was also spoken to earlier today as well. And we have received really great sentiment from the sector in terms of participating again in a second year this year. So Oz Art Day is occurring again. It's taking place on Thursday, the 22nd of October, and 52% of our participants from the inaugural year have indicated that they have an intention to participate this year, which is really great.
I mean, I'm sure it's a lot of work. Can I get a sense, is it publicly listed what the cost of delivering the Oz Art Day is?
It is, yes. We've got that available. We can share that with you afterwards.
That would be great, because I guess I'm just, again, wanting to make sure there's bang for buck. When I just do an analysis of 2.4 million raised by 323 organisations participating, that comes out on average around 7,430 per org. I'm assuming not all do the same outcome, but I can see, and that's, I'm keen to hear your thoughts, that's a blunt way of looking at it, but that does put in perspective why for small organisations they're saying, whilst they might have gotten, I guess, airplay or visibility, the return is proportionally small.
Yeah.
How does the data show? I'm assuming you've collected data that identifies, the average amount raised by organisations participating and all of that?
Yeah. We have the figures for us in terms of the investment from Creative Australia to create this national platform was a $3 return on investment for every $1 that we invested into the program. Importantly too, this, whilst it's a 12 or 24-hour kind of dedicated public moment, the anecdotal feedback that we received from participants was that they had been talking to many donors across perhaps 12 months, of which those donors hadn't previously had a reason why now. And Oz Art Day actually created that moment to say, this is why now. And not only in terms of procuring that kind of moment for why now, it's also the retention proposition that Oz Art Day allows for further ongoing relationships to be explored. And so when we talk about kind of that return on investment, we are, I think the lens needs to be far broader than just that 12 or 24-hour outcome.
All right, so you'll be collecting data around continuity and those kind of aspects.
Yes,
repeats and those kind of things. Because I guess the other piece is the data piece. We've had obviously evidence around discrepancies of funding on geographic location, whether urban versus regional, but also Western Sydney versus Eastern Sydney. And maybe Creative Australia can maybe, what policies are being implemented to ensure there is that, a more equity of access to the funding and opportunities.
Shall I talk to her? Yeah, great. Thank you so much. Really fabulous question. And we are very mindful of the national remit of Creative Australia. We have 5 regionally based or locally based state manager development and partnerships as their positions. They're based in Melbourne, looking after both Victoria and Tasmania. We have a colleague based in Sydney that looks after New South Wales and ACT. We have a colleague that is based in Perth that their remit includes the whole of Western Australia, a colleague based in Brisbane who looks after the whole of Queensland, and another colleague who's based in Adelaide whose remit is South Australia and the Northern Territory. Their work is to engage with the sector through that localised lens. They provide a service that offers a one-on-one session where they can engage with artists and arts organisations to provide a methodology around fundraising, increasing their skills, capability and also confidence to fundraise, identifying that those three are the main barriers as to financial success in fundraising. Those state managers offer both workshops locally in those areas and they also provide that one-on-one service. So in the 2025 calendar year, there was over 1,000 one-on-one coaching and advisory services that were offered, and there were 40 regional place-based trips that included both that coaching service but also workshop delivery.
And those state-based managers are also very active in promoting Oz Arts Day and ACF.
Got the mute thing happening again.
Could you hear me when I just spoke then?
Yes.
Okay, great. Sorry. The other point I would just make on Oz Arts Day,
there is an echo. There is an echo, which might have stopped now because I can see that Ms. Mercer is
very much around creating this culture of giving, raising the profile of arts and giving to the arts, not just among, typical philanthropists, but among everyday Australians. So mums, dads, children getting involved and realising that arts is not just the opera. It's, the song that they're listening to in the car, on the way to school. It's the book that they're reading, and to sort of galvanise, sort of collective interest around giving to the arts because of what it does in their everyday lives. So I think that's one of the key objectives there. And then, of course, obviously to raise money for the arts organisations that participate. One thing we heard this morning was the potential for a campaign, a national campaign around arts. Why does tourism have campaigns? Arts doesn't have a campaign. I mean, there is potential, I think, around Oz Arts Day, given it's now an established vehicle, for us to do, potentially, a better job of storytelling about the public value of the arts. That should be key in our messaging, and to make this sort of Oz Arts Day campaign bigger and better over time. The other thing that we're looking at is potentially working with other corporate partners to expand this type of campaign. You can imagine if some corporate partners I won't mention, but if they got on board, suddenly, that profile, the campaign profile would increase. We would have access to their marketing channels and their audiences. And so I think there are ways that we can make this thing much bigger over time and have a lot more eyeballs and traffic to that site to see what arts organisations are on there and how they might get involved and donate and participate.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think that has to be that campaign. I think will be the benefits from a philanthropic and donation point of view, but for the broader purpose around social cohesion, multicultural versus monoculture, the arts has a pretty big role to play in reinforcing what modern Australia is.
Very much so. Sorry, we didn't hear the beginning of your question.
You need to turn yours on. Larry, you need to turn your speaker on.
Do you, Ms. Steele, do you want to restate the start of that question, because Creative Australia didn't hear it?
Yeah, I mean, look, I was just referring to that that discussion around better communications. I mean, one of the evidence this morning was saying, ironically, for a sector that's about storytelling, it's not good about telling its own story or its own impact. So if Oz Art Day is sort of that centrepiece opportunity, maybe around a national campaign to raise awareness, because the evidence was that the philanthropic donations is not automatically just because of the benefits from a tax deduction point of view, but it's actually more around the awareness. and so publicity may well be a part of that. And obviously then there's a greater social cohesion role between multicultural versus monoculture around modern Australia. So the arts is essential to that piece. So sorry, it's a rambly question, but it's
I think it's a great opportunity.
What would a campaign look like? The benefits that would benefit philanthropic giving, but also social cohesion.
Look, I think this time around, it will happen again in October. I think we can do a much better job with our social media and PR strategy that supports the campaign to, as you describe, do a much better job of telling the impact story around art and its contribution to wellbeing, to our health, and to, the connectedness, in our communities and its role in driving social cohesion. We have great data and stats that we can bring to life in any sort of PR campaign through our National Arts Participation Survey that I mentioned earlier. There's some wonderful stats around young people in particular and when they have access to the arts, what it does for them for the rest of their lives. And, in terms of, mental health and other benefits. So I think we can do a much better job with Oz Arts Day in telling that impact story over time.
Actually, is this data available, Chair? But is the arts one of the greatest employers in Australia in our economy?
It certainly has. Yeah, I don't know what the data is. I don't know if Office of the Arts might have that data, or Creative Australia. But if somebody does have that and can provide that to us on notice, that would be terrific.
I'm happy to take that on notice. I don't have the figures right here, so I don't want to misquote figures, but we do have that data and I'm very happy to provide it.
Yeah, fantastic. And Ms. Stegel, I'm sorry, go on, Ms. Wolski.
No, that's okay.
I was just going to say, before we move off Oz Arts Day, can I just, because I don't want to kind of let Ms. Steele take it somewhere else and then it'll feel like we're going all the way back. But just, you mentioned 48% were first-time donors. What more do we know about them? Were they the smaller donors? Were they big donors? Is there any insight into not only who they were and what they donated, but do organisations have any feedback on why they think they got those new donors, first-time donors?
Okay, how are we going? Can you hear? Fab. Oh, gosh, we might have navigated the system. Okay, thank you, Chair, for the question. We have, so as part of the acquittal process for Oz Art Day participants, we asked for feedback that was both qualitative and quantitative. The statistics that we've referenced here are the quantitative, but there is a lot of qualitative that is known to us as the organisation delivering Oz Art Day. I referenced earlier about that kind of why now proposition. So Oz Art Day did create this moment for those that had engaged in conversations with potential philanthropists to say this is a perfect opportunity to jump in as a brand new and support us moment. In addition to that, some of the Oz Art Day campaigns were complementary to other arts activity that was taking place by the participants. So an example being perhaps an opening night of a festival, of which fell on the same occasion as Oz Art Day, and therefore they held a fundraiser in addition to the celebration of their opening activity. So yes, we can share more of the anecdotal with you, but that's just two examples.
That's great, thank you. That's great. And the only other Oz Arts Day question I wanted to ask, it's clear that you've had a bunch of learnings out of it. Are there any other things that you've learned that you're doing differently? And I'm very mindful about the feedback from small orgs about the amount of work they had to do. So I guess one question is about new arts organisations or individuals who might be looking to do it, whether there's different ways now of supporting them. So I guess, what's going to be different and how are you going to measure how much more effective the second one is to the first.
Great. Thank you for the question again. So we've actually just closed the micro grant opportunity for artists and small to medium arts organisations that wish to participate in the day. That small to medium category is defined by an operating budget of under $5 million. And the micro grants that we are offering this year as part of the initiative is both a dedicated grant to create Oz Art Day content to support that value proposition, the reason for their ask. So we've offered a grant to support that really great content that speaks to perhaps more about the impact of their work as opposed to the practice and come and see my show narrative that might be more in the mainstream. And then in addition to that, we're offering a matched funding grant. So again, targeting the artists and small to medium arts sector to support their campaign, achieving success and momentum across that public Oz Art Day date. So that's one example of how we're hoping to help elevate for our second year.
Fabulous. I'll hand back to you, Ms. Steggall, if you have.
That's all right. I didn't have many more. I mean, the rest is kind of, it's all good. I'm good. Over to you.
Okay, okay, great. I wanted to pick up on the Impact Investment Fund, and you've touched on it in the opening statement, but I guess just could we get a bit more of an update on the pilot and the work that you've done?
Absolutely. Thank you, Tara. I think we've sorted our sound problems now, so we're off and running. Great. I'm really pleased to answer this question and excited about this opportunity. I think while we recognise philanthropy remains really critical to this mix, if we want a larger and more financially resilient creative economy, we need to include different kinds of capital into the mix. And that's the role I think we see for impact investing. So Revive speaks specifically to this model of government funds, philanthropic funds and commercial funds, and this is this kind of vehicle. We're also excited about the way that it already engages with philanthropy in that many philanthropic foundations and PAFs will be giving parts of their corpus as investments towards this fund. So we're really excited to see it build and develop. There's several parts to this. One is building a culture of repayable finance within the sector. Although this is not a new model, impact investing exists across different sectors. And actually, the impact investing sector in Australia is $20 billion. So there's funds there that just the creative industries are not getting our hands on. So what we're hoping to do is build this culture of understanding what repayable finance looks like. And that means that we've spent some time talking to the sector about how they might engage with impact investing, what kinds of organisations are best suited to it, what kinds of projects are best funded through impact investing. We spent a lot of time on this, want to get it right, because this fund only works if it responds to the needs of the sector, as well as engaging with philanthropy. So we're building a suite of capability building programs and investment readiness programs so that when we do launch this fund, which we're hoping will be in early 2027, the sector is ready and able to really take advantage of this opportunity. And the philanthropic sector, who will be our first investors, are really ready to jump on this opportunity with us. I clarify, it's a demonstration fund. It's a first for the creative industries. So what we're doing is asking some philanthropic partners to come along as investors with us on the journey, to help us find ways to fund arts organisations that are flexible, that are kind. I mean, as we know now, arts organisations, often because of their business models, can't even access loan finance if they wanted to. So providing this platform and allowing philanthropic partners to come with us and support the sector in this way is a really exciting prospect. So we're down to the nitty-gritty of feeling like what the fund looks like, seeing who might be our core investors. We've had some initial conversations with philanthropy. They're as excited as I am, which is a really wonderful thing. So we feel like this project is gaining a lot of momentum and following in the footsteps of our international peers and other for-purpose sectors that are really leveraging this kind of finance for really good work.
Presumably, if it's repayable finance or loans, it's got to be safeguards. So for arts organisations, what sorts of, is it different to other sectors where there's impact investing, or is it fairly similar sorts of I guess, guardrails?
Yeah, I think that there are parallels that we're learning from other sectors, and we've been really fortunate to. One of the biggest guardrails is getting organisations ready to understand whether they might be the right candidate for impact investing. It's really important to note that organisations won't receive investment unless they've been cleared by an investment committee that are looking for organisations that can pay back repayable finance. So we really recognise this fund is not for everybody. It's part of the makeup of funding and financing. There are organisations for whom generating revenue and having a profit driver within their business is not something that they want to do. And we understand that we're looking for organisations that really have that kind of profit drive in mind, I suppose, and can pay back this loan. I think some of the other ways we're thinking about building in safeguards and protecting the sector is Creative Australia is playing a concessional first loss role in the fund. So that means that we'll be jumping in first to protect any losses that do come from the fund. We're also working to understand what kind of loans best suit this kind of sector. So it's not just one kind of term-based loan. We might be looking at loans that have bullet repayments. We might be looking at deferred interest payments. There's a whole range of things we can do because us as government are coming in to, I guess, play a concessional underwriting role in this fund. But also we're inviting philanthropy to work with us that recognise that we need to understand how these mechanisms best work for the sector and be flexible, be concessional when it comes to these terms so we get something that really works and demonstrates the viability of repayable finance.
Great. Thank you for talking me through that. I think we're all quite keen to see what it actually looks like. Can I ask you, one of the biggest things that has been raised with the committee, particularly from small to mediums and individuals, is that whole advocacy piece and who has the time and the capacity to do it. And you've touched on it in the opening statement, but can we, there's been a whole lot of ideas put to us about hubs and people seem to be saying the training is one thing, but I'm already stretched, or my tiny team is already stretched. And also commenting that when an individual gets trained, they then become really attractive, not just within the arts sector, but to another philanthropic sector, and that people then get offered bigger bucks to leave the arts sector with that fundraising skill set that they've developed. So I just want to ask you whether you've thought about a shared services fundraising model. It's really just like, what are your thoughts about how can we realistically, in a scalable way, support these small to mediums beyond what we're already doing? It's just a little question.
Fundraising is really hard. Fundraising for the arts is particularly hard. And I think we want to start by really recognising that. Arts organisations are stretched, and so dedicating time and resources to fundraising has to be targeted and efficient and effective. So it's not just about the training capacity, but it's about understanding what programs and what initiatives really get to the heart of what organisations need. I think there is work to do, and I know we've touched on it on the supply side, working with philanthropy. I think it's all very well for us to say to the sector, here are the skills and here are the opportunities, but if there isn't the philanthropic funds coming through the door, if there aren't philanthropists interested in supporting arts and culture, that's a big gap. So I do think that forms part of the equation, but I might also pass to my colleague Lara Wolski because she has some thoughts on this too.
Look, I was just going to add, I think there is a role for Creative Australia in the advocacy space, particularly with those wealth intermediaries, that are recommending cause mandates to their clients. As this intergenerational wealth transfer occurs, I think there's absolutely a role for our teams and our staff to be out there, where these sectors are coming together, where the wealth managers meet. We need to be there and ensure that arts is part of the conversation about where to direct some of these funds. I think, Jane, you and I were talking earlier about a potential example through Plus One, our match funding programs, where organisations have actually raised funds to actually staff themselves. To actually employ fundraising, dedicated staff. So organisations are using our existing programs to actually do exactly as some of the speakers, described, to sort of meet that need.
And what about technology like CRM platforms or things that could where there could be a large number of smaller organisations accessing a common one that they haven't had to invent all by themselves? Is there an opportunity for something like that?
I might actually pass to Gillian on this one, because we actually have done quite a bit of research into CRM as a shared service and the opportunity there.
There we go. Okay. Thank you, Lara. Thank you, Chair. So we're very interested in how efficiencies could be achieved through the collective of our sector. There are already consortiums that are happening in the sector that have been self-derived to help offset the very expensive costs of CRM management. We actually commissioned a survey that engaged particularly looking at the small to medium sector, but also spoke to a couple of the larger organisations as well to identify where there might be gaps first of all, to identify what platforms were being used, what were the really well considered functions of those platforms, and what were potentially some barriers around the kind of nil function of those platforms, or in fact, if it was actually fiscal licensing challenges. We're continuing to review those findings and think about the role that Creative Australia can play to support shared servicing models. That's something that remains of interest to us.
Yeah, great. And I think this is something we'll certainly be thinking about. I don't know if anyone's looking at AI and the role it plays. That's all too much to think about, but being as creative as we can around it. Yeah. The other thing I wanted to go back to was just, we've talked about matched funding, and I'm just curious about what the most common reasons are that organisations miss out on the programs like Amplify or Plus One or Match Lab, where they're not eligible. What are some of the things that you see where you go, oh, we know they're going to miss out because of the criteria? Is there any insight into that?
What I can say is those programs, in many ways, assessing them are quite heartbreaking because there is so much unfunded opportunity in that space. So we already recognise that. I think that what we're seeing is organisations are being, I guess, increasingly creative about the reasons why they might fundraise. Definitely things like annual appeals are still something that people apply for match funding for. That's really important. I think what we've done this year, and we've revised some of our match funding programs this year to, I guess, work with organisations to make sure that they know that they're eligible within their spaces. So this year we've just launched our program, which means we've got match funding for advanced organisations, which is $50,000 for 2 years. But then match funding for some beginner organisations, which is smaller amounts. Because to that point too about small to medium arts organisations, we recognise that it's really difficult in a competitive grant field to have smaller organisations with really exciting ambitions that might be scaled differently, competing against larger organisations for the same pool of funding. So by splitting those two, we're creating opportunity for smaller organisations that maybe wouldn't be as competitive in that bigger field to put out their project and build that capacity. And I think to my colleague's point too, things like investing in a CRM, things like investing in a fundraising strategy in case for support. We see more and more organisations not just pitching for match funding to get a project off the ground, but pitching for that kind of organisational, operational scaffolding that's going to allow them to build on and fundraise in successive years. And that's what I think is quite special about our match funding programs at Creative Australia.
One of the comments that was offered this morning was around organisations not necessarily being big in their ask and actually being a bit timid in their ask. Do you have any thoughts on what you're seeing from the donor perspective and what you're seeing is effective?
Yes, absolutely. So through the Australian Cultural Fund, there were over 1,200 campaigns that ran through there. And our team there gives a lot of advice on how do you set your target, what to ask for and what that's meaningful. A lot of that is about helping organisations understand who their donors are and what they might be giving. I do think that there are ways in which we can equip the sector to be more ambitious. And that's not just about asking for more, but it's also being able to articulate their long-term impact. So moving back to that idea about having organisations, giving them the skills to be able to articulate their public value, what it means to give to arts and culture, and also encouraging multi-year donations. Going back to that best practice philanthropy, as we know, is not just asking for more, it's asking for more over the years. So these kinds of fundraising strategies we communicate through the Australian Cultural Fund, but we do also communicate through our capability building programs and our coaching services and advice.
Now, I just want to advise that a little while ago the Deputy Chair joined, but there's sound problems, so we can see her there, but I'm not going to ask her to ask a question. I've still got a heap I want to ask. So the next one just relates to evidence that was given by the Western Sydney Arts Alliance around the number of Western Sydney organisations that had received matched funding under I gather a range of programs, and that there was not a very big representation, in fact, none that were identifiably Western Sydney-based organisations. So I just wanted to, I don't know what period that was, so I just want to get the latest information, if it's available, about where the geography of where recipients come from is identified, and to your knowledge whether Western Sydney has been represented at all in the matched funding. Is it, I don't know whether you know that or off the top of your head, but is that data that we are able to have oversight of?
I don't know it off the top of my head, but that is something we can provide you. We think a lot about jurisdictional representation in these programs, so being able to have this conversation is really important. We can provide that.
Yeah, I think from people like the Deputy Chair and other committee members, this desire to see the philanthropy spread much wider has been a really consistent theme. Obviously, whether it's Western Sydney or even further peri-urban regions like mine, more rural and regional areas, is how do you analyse that data, and are there sort of targets that you have in terms of evaluating the effectiveness of how philanthropy that comes through Creative Australia mechanisms is distributed?
So I'll pass to my colleague Gillian Murphy.
Great, thank you. Chair, do you mind just expanding on the question, specifically philanthropy that comes into Creative Australia and is dispersed?
No, through the channels like your matched funding and the like, the analysis that you do through those channels.
Yes, thank you. So we have a division within Creative Australia that looks after arts investment, and they do have the policy around, they hold the policy, I should say, around our KPIs, but we do look at GDP and we look at state and territory spread against that GDP in addition to regional and remote investments. So it is absolutely a factor for us when we consider our investments, and that includes our match funding grants.
Yeah, terrific. Look, I wanted to touch on just some practicalities, I guess, around the merger of Creative Partnerships and Creative Australia, and really just ask how complete that integration is, and whether there is more work to do. Is that something that is considered done and embedded and now sort of, ticked off, as it were?
Thank you, Chair. And as someone that came across from Creative Partnerships Australia as a part of that merger, and I know that my colleagues at the Office for the Arts, Ali and Julia, helped with that process, I can only say that's been a really exciting one. The way that we've been able to embed and then expand the work of Creative Partnerships is something I think would not have been possible with it as a standalone agency. So although work in private sector support is never done, what do we say? Philanthropy never sleeps. We do think that the way in which it's been brought into the core functions of Creative Australia has been really enabling. The way it makes a lot of sense for it to be centralised in the space where we're talking to organisations about grants, we're talking to them about the private sector, and now about different kinds of investment functions. The capacity to take what we do and scale it, I think, has been really clearly demonstrated in all the kind of different programs in which private sector support is now a key part of the conversation for Creative Australia and the sector more broadly.
Terrific. And my last couple of questions just relate to capacity building. And I'm curious, I was just trying to get reflecting on the practical support that's available for organisations before they're philanthropy ready, and things that you would have been delivering through different training and other support mechanisms. But can we articulate what that practical support looks like? Because I think we'd like to be able to not just sort of be vague about it, oh, you know, there's support, but what does it, if I'm an arts org, what does it actually look like to me?
Great. There we go. Thank you. So we have, within our development and partnerships division here at Creative Australia, we have a capability development team, who offer a range of programs that support leadership. It supports governance. There is a whole series of framework around engagement with board, and that is all in addition to the dedicated fundraising services that we offer. You may also be aware of the new entity Creative Workplaces, which also offers other tools and resources around organisational structure and kind of codes of ethics and legal responsibilities as a practising artist or arts organisation. So there is a suite of resources and tools on offer. I can't speak to them in detail. Lara, however, has. Hold on one sec.
Sorry, it's hard for us to get that natural and build upon. I think Gillian's done a great job, sort of an overview of the capability, landscape and the range of types of supports that we provide. But in terms of fundraising support, I guess to put it simply, there are a number of different things that we offer to arts organisations and artists. There are match funding programs. As we described, they are tailored to a beginner, intermediate and advanced level. We also provide resources and self-guided learning on our website. So we're going to be launching a new learning hub at the end of the year, which has guides and fact sheets, templates, checklists, like a whole lot of practical support. If you're developing a fundraising strategy from scratch, that will certainly help you. We also have workshops that are targeted either beginner or advanced. So we acknowledge that there's not one workshop around fundraising for arts organisations that, there's no one size fits all. So we have workshops for beginner fundraisers, and then we have webinars on mastering arts fundraising for those more, organisations we would consider that are, more at that advanced level and more sophisticated in their practice. The state managers that Gillian mentioned that are based all over Australia also facilitate what we call communities of practice. So that's where there are these structured peer learning spaces where I've seen these work so beautifully, where one arts organisation is learning from another on, why they've been successful, and just that peer learning is just so powerful when it comes to fundraising and who's been successful and why, and that knowledge exchange. We also offer training scholarships in collaboration with the Fundraising Institute of Australia. So that's to offer training to senior arts managers and leaders in arts fundraising, and that one-to-one support and coaching. So there's a range of different supports.
Thank you. That is just great to get it all in one place. And I suppose just following on from that is in terms of then the number of organisations who have been through that, capacity building sort of process, are we able to measure the benefits? Like, is there feedback to close that loop about the benefits they've experienced and whether it actually has corresponded with an increase in fundraising capacity?
Yeah, look, I think that's definitely an area of focus for us into the future. We've imagined a lot of the programs that I just described, and a part of that when we launch some of these things in the coming months is to have a very solid measurement framework around them so that we can measure how much, how well, and did we make any difference? So the type of things that we'd like to see, say out of a peer learning network is, did you increase your knowledge and skills? Did you increase your networks in your local area? So, we were going to have some measurement frameworks in place that absolutely help tell the story of the impact of some of this work.
Great. And my very last question for all of you is whether there are programs or initiatives that are effective in other jurisdictions that could be considered for implementation by the Office of the Arts or Creative Australia that are not currently available, that you've spotted?
I think Ali's about to speak.
Ask Lara if it's okay to speak to this, because I know that Creative Australia has done a lot of work looking into other models that are being utilised internationally and taking the lessons learned from those conversations with the people who are on the ground delivering these programs to inform the work that Creative Australia are doing.
Look, the one I was going to mention would directly follow on from that comment, Ali, and that is some of the work that Canada is doing. We had the CEO of their Arts Council in town last week, and we were able to have a wonderful conversation about some of the work that they're doing to incentivise the setup of endowments. So they've been in this space for quite a long time. They have something called the Canada Cultural Investment Fund, where they look to arts organisations and foundations to apply to the national body, where there's a matched funding arrangement so that the government money is actually incentivising the setup of that endowment fund for the arts organisation, or it's increasing the amount of money that's already in there. And as we know, endowments provide that sustainable, ongoing funding stream for arts organisations. So it's a really interesting model, and I think we can learn a lot from it. The matched funding that Canada offers in this space is capped to a certain amount, because it's not an insignificant amount of money either that they offer with their matched grants.
Fabulous. Look, thank you for all of that. I'll just give you one last opportunity if there's something that you intended to mention that we haven't touched on. Yes.
Chair, just in relation to the question on notice that I took earlier, I do have those figures to hand. Apologies for not having them. I should know them off the top of my head. But just so I don't need to respond to the question on notice later for the record, in 2023-24, which is the latest figures that are available, culture and creative activity contributed $67.4 billion to Australia's GDP. And around 591,300 people were employed in a cultural or creative industry, and 50,000 on top of that 50,000 were employed in the sector as a secondary job. So they're the latest figures that we have available.
Fabulous. Thank you very much for that. And just last chance, Creative Australia, anything else you'd like to add?
Look, I think one thing that we're doing at the moment in a small way are strategic co-investments, and I've seen that pooled funding has come up a lot through some of the submissions and the subsequent, hearing and questioning. And so we're doing this in small ways at the moment, where Creative Australia is putting small amounts of money together with ideas from arts organisations and philanthropy and other interests, on to fund projects where we see there's strategic alignment and there's whole of sector benefits potentially. So we're sort of seed funding these sort of pooled funding with the idea that we move out over time. So I think that's potentially an area of growth is strategic co-investment.
Fabulous. Thank you so much for your attendance at today's hearing. It's been a real journey for the committee from when we first had discussions with you in private and public briefings and hearings. If there is any other additional information that you've been asked to provide, please send this through to the Secretariat by the 18th of August. You'll be sent a copy of the transcript of your evidence to which you may suggest corrections, particularly when a word has disappeared in the connection. But again, thank you very much for the work that you do and the support that you give to arts orgs to attract philanthropists, and we hope we'll be able to support that work even further once our recommendations come out. But the subcommittee is now adjourned and the hearing is concluded. Thank you.